Yeah. I
This
don't
is
know. We'll edit. I'm sure we'll edit. But
yeah. I feel like there's supposed to be like a launch animation or something after that countdown.
exactly. Um, let's try an intro. Let's see what happens. Michael is not keen on them. He likes the more natural, just starting.
Yeah.
But hello, everyone. All four of you listeners. Thank you for joining the Metametheist podcast. Today, it's just me, Matt, who actually, Michael is generally the face. I'm more of the background voice, the non sequiturs in his ear. I think worm tongue to Theoden. But today it is my turn, and I have as our guest my wonderful, dear, talented, intelligent friend, Mitch Borchardt. Or do you say Borchardt? How do you say it?
Borchardt is usually how I say it.
Okay.
But, there's so many different ways to
Well,
pronounce it.
yeah. And I've heard your name announced because so Mitch is a primarily jazz saxophone player. And and he likes to solo a lot, and deservedly so because he's really pretty studied at it, pretty good at it. And so you hear his name announced by other people so often that you don't quite get a consensus on which way it's supposed to be said.
They try. They
They
try.
try. Bless their hearts. They try. Yes.
hmm As with all like soloist musicians,
hmm
people just, so a lot of times you sit in with a band for the first time, and then whoever's the front man for that group attempts it for the first time, or they lean over like halfway through, like what's your name? What's your last name? Or something, and they try.
Absolutely. Yes. I'm always super impressed because I sit in on some bands here and there. And on the odd occasion when I do take a solo or when they're just announcing, the brass section,
hmm
uh, I'm always impressed when they don't ask my name and they say it. Like, my name's not hard to pronounce. It's just I'm impressed that they know it without having to ask because I'm
That
usually
is
just a
so
sub.
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it really shows that there's some people that really care about that,
they do.
for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. And they understand that it's not just the music that goes into making a good experience for the audience. Because that's the
Yeah.
whole point, right? Is to give the audience this whole holistic experience of an event that they
Right,
just
this
witness and are
packaged
part of.
thing for the audience. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've noticed that there are bands that do it better than others. Some are a little too casual, like they pretty much ignore the audience and just play.
Yeah.
Um, some overdo it. I will say I had the privilege of hearing the um, which branch was it? The Air Force Band recently,
Yeah.
which is like one of the premier. They're really good. Tons of great musicians, and like literally every aspect of their performance is like scripted.
Yeah. They're super down the pipe. Is that Airman of Note? Did you?
This was the actual concert band.
Oh, the concert band. Got
Yes, yeah. So, but otherwise, yes, the jazz ensemble is the Airmen of Note, which I saw them in when I was in high school. That was pretty cool. But yeah, this was the
it.
full
Yeah.
concert band and the singing sergeants. Their choir division also was there.
Oh, cool. It was
Yeah,
like a whole night event
it
sort of
was.
deal.
Yeah, a lot of patriotic stuff as you would imagine, but a lot of like really awesome, concert band wind ensemble type things. They did an arrangement of the finale to Shostakovich 5, which is like this big, it's big and
Yeah.
dramatic and a giant middle finger to communism. So, or at least to Stalin, who deserves all the middle fingers.
He
So,
deserved it. If
yep,
one person deserved
yep.
it.
Oh man. So, but yeah, so we talked, over text the other day. We want to talk about mainly music, right? That's kind of our shared experience.
Yeah, definitely.
Excellent. But we're both very holistic thinkers, so I'm sure it'll branch into other areas.
Yeah. I guess what kind of spurred that for me was I have read through, and I was interested in knowing if you had read through it or not, this book, Effortless Mastery by Kenny Werner. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, I've actually met the guy.
You've met Kenny Werner. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
he gave a seminar and a concert in Green Bay when it was when we were in college, because I remember going and I saw Dr. Atwell, who was the horn professor at the time. He went,
Hmm.
and a few other folks. But yeah, it was at, I think, the Hyde Music in Green Bay, one of the music
Okay.
stores. And yeah, he sat at his piano, and I remember him answering the question. He, gave the spiel about what it is and the mindset behind it. And I remember he was almost getting not annoyed. He had a lot of patience, but you could tell he had to answer this type of question a lot, where people tried to like call it Buddhism or things like that, like because
Sure,
it's very
sure.
akin to that way of viewing the world.
Hmm.
Uh, and we'll talk about what that is for the people who don't know. But
Yeah,
just to finish my thing, it was yeah, people kept like labeling what he was talking about, and he was very
right.
adamant. It's like, no, we're not putting a like secular name or sacred name to this. It's just it's just a vibe.
Yeah, it's just this method that he's kind of taken from different disciplines.
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
So what? Yeah, in your words, what would you say that effortless mastery is and what it's about?
Well, I think the he keeps on trying to define what mastery is, and you know, I think it's a loaded word for a lot of us musicians, because we can sit there and imagine all the things that we haven't mastered, um, or all the things that we just feel, a little shaky about. But he talks about how mastery is more or less something that you could play perfectly every time without thinking about it. Um, and to add effortless to it is, um, really to uh, unburden yourself from all of those expectations that you should you should have mastery over, this style of music or this piece or this aspect of your playing, and instead just like revel in and enjoy the things that you can play perfectly every time. And that happiness, that joy will like radiate out into your playing and to the enjoyment of the audience. And it's really, and this is kind of where that Buddhism like connection comes in, is kind of separating your ego from your playing.
Hmm. Yeah, I like that a lot. It brings to mind this. I think is a concept that I learned from Buddhism, but it's instantaneous thought and action. Like there's no buffer in between of like, well, should I
Mm,
do this or is this the right thing to do? It's just whether it's right or wrong is irrelevant. It's just here's what I'm doing and it happens.
right.
And so you get the that's where a lot of the concept of the observer comes from. Like you are just observing your actions rather than trying to manipulate them so much.
Yeah. Um, so for, I guess, people in the audience, when we talk about, and Kenny Werner, amazing jazz pianist, or pianist in general, I would say.
Hmm.
So when we're talking about um, jazz music and one of its core uh, like aspects of playing jazz is improvising. So that's being able to play a solo and basically kind of weave your way through what's happening in the tune to construct, your what you have to say about that tune,
Hmm. Right.
in the moment. Um, and uh, a lot of stuff can get in the way of that, of playing kind of what you actually want to play. Um, and like you said, it all flows out so much easier and so much better when you're not overthinking it, when you're not sitting there like, oh my gosh, like there's this person in the audience. What are they gonna think about me? All that sort of stuff. Um, so I kind of wanted to ask you, Matt, like,
Hmm.
were there some, and what has been your like? your experience with like performance anxiety, and what were like maybe some like of the most anxious moments you might have had.
Okay, yeah, let's get into it. That's fine. It's funny because I've actually just been addressing that aspect of myself and my career um, the most. Like, uh, so I've actually met with a few people about it and have thought a lot about it. I've read a ton of books about it, or at least I own a ton of books about it. Um,
Well, the hopeful reading section.
oh man, the reading
Yeah.
list is, yeah, it's like the national debt. It just keeps
Yeah.
it just keeps going. Uh, so yes, performance anxiety or nerves, or I learned that in baseball they're called the yips, which I think is really funny.
I've heard the yips as a term before too. Yeah.
Yeah, or maybe it's not even nerves, but it's like for some reason things just aren't happening. Like it's just not aligning
Right.
when you're trying to do it and it's just not working. It's just not working. So
It's like you're just like a half a second off for
mhm.
some reason, and you just can't get it to line up the way you want.
Yep, and it just snowballs for whatever reason. Yeah.
Hmm.
So all that being said, yes, I've experienced all of those quite a bit. Uh, and it's funny because I'll get to how I address it, but it's important to understand, it's the Oracle of Delphi thing, know thyself, right? before you
Yeah.
try to adjust and maneuver and learn your destiny or all that crap. Uh, you have to know yourself enough to actually know what you're supposed to be working on. Because some things aren't broken, but it might feel like they are, and you have to address that, and the actual problem just exists still, which is more
Hmm.
frustrating because you feel like you're doing something, and then you go test it in the field, and it still blows up in your face. Um, which I feel like we've both gone through that a couple times.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So, yeah, the knowing thyself. So, it took me sitting down and really thinking about um, when I get nervous, what I get nervous about, uh, and what I do when I'm nervous, either to help or to hinder myself, either one. Uh, I'm not generally nervous when I'm playing with others. I'm almost never nervous when I'm playing in a large ensemble, and that's not because I can hide necessarily. I don't feel like I'm hiding because I play trombone. You can't hide when you play trombone. And generally, I'm in the more. I either play usually, not to toot my own horn, pun intended, but I usually end up playing first or bass trombone, which are the two exposed spots, in
Yeah.
sections. Um, so I don't hide, but I get this sense of I'm a team player. Some players play because they want the attention on themselves, and that's fine. That's not a bad thing. Um, people like those players, and they tend to attract audiences. A lot of the time, you get the soloist, or the hot shot, um, and it's fun to do that once in a while. Uh, but overall, I feel most comfortable when I'm playing with people, when I'm part of a team, when we're all supporting each other. I'm a more community driven person like that, so I feel most at home when I can support and be supported, uh, rather than like hoist the standard myself.
Yeah.
So I do get nervous when I'm not as prepared as I should be. uh, and that's a tricky concept because you never feel quite ready for a
Yeah.
lot of things.
Where's the dividing line
Right.
between prepared and over prepared
Right.
and under prepared?
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, but in general, if you know how you do things playing wise well enough, if you know your technique, if you know the music well enough overall, like when you're just going to survive and when you're going to be okay.
Hmm.
But then you also know it's like, oh, I am definitely not going to be okay. So, um, And it's funny, sometimes I'm not nervous when that happens, because when you just kind of give up, so to speak, when you just go, F it, and you just go, so, sometimes that turns out to be one of the best things you do.
Suddenly it's better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and that actually attaches to what we're talking about quite a bit. When you try to control, I actually got called a control freak in so many words. Uh, I was getting a new mouthpiece, because that's what you do in the brass world. If you're not playing well, you obviously need a new mouthpiece.
More better gear.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
In this case, I did. Again, I know myself well enough to know that, okay, I've gotten as far as I can with the equipment I have, and now it's time to look for these specific aspects that I want to improve simply by using different materials.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not my mouthpiece will help me play higher. It's my mouthpiece will sound better in the high register. Like that's,
Sure.
separate from me. It's simply an equipment thing. When I do what I do on this equipment, this happens.
Yep.
So it's very important to separate yourself from, I don't attach myself to my equipment anymore. It's just, this isn't my mouthpiece. This is the mouthpiece I'm using right now.
It's just a tool.
Exactly. Right. To make the music that you feel should come out,
Mm-hmm.
So I was testing, and this is with a man named Christian Griego, who is the research and development and like the kind of the management of the Getzen company and the Edwards company. They're the same umbrella, and they make brass instruments. And he has outfitted the best players in the country and the world. He's at least met and listened to all the best people, and his equipment is played by some of the best, most like meticulous in a good way type of folks. So he knows what he's talking about. And he's no slouch of a player in his own right. He's amazing. So, I was testing out the equipment, and he was helping me, maneuver all that. But then he had me just play in general. He kind of just gave me an impromptu lesson. And it was tied to the equipment, and the habits we form when we're trying to do something that maybe our setup isn't ready for. So we form habits, which is a whole nother part of our, performance anxiety bubble.
Mm-hmm.
So the habits I had formed was I got scared of certain notes, particularly a high D in the trombone world. I got, and because my mouthpiece wasn't quite great at that note, I became scared of it in a way. Mm-hmm. So even on a mouthpiece that was going to play it just fine, it didn't come out well because it was me at that point, my habits.
Yeah, the hesitancy came through.
Mm-hmm, absolutely it did. So, and he kind of, and there were other issues too, where I, in an effort to play everything perfectly, let's say, I really bared down on the control aspect of my playing. So my articulation, how I used my mouth and my tongue were very rigid. Mm-hmm. The sound was a little too, the sound spectrum for our instruments is massive. You can play these like soft, beautiful, sonorous things. You can punch through a wall and peel paint off. Mm-hmm. You can do all that. Hector Berlioz has a great quote about the trombone, and it's amazing.
I gotta hear it now.
Oh, geez, let me find it. Berlioz trombone quote. It's like a whole paragraph, and I don't know if it's in his book, like his orchestration book, because his book is really famous. But let's see, where is his like? Oh, this is from his book. That's why. There it is. Okay. All right. I won't use a French accent, but he says in his words, "I regard the trombone as the true leader of the race of wind instruments that I have described as epic. It possesses nobility and grandeur to a high degree, and has all the solemnity, there it is, of high musical poetry, ranging from a calm, imposing devotional aura to the wild clamors of an orgiastic outburst. It is up to the composer to make it chant like a chorus of priests, or utter threats, then muffled groans, and then a subdued funeral knell, and then a resounding hymn of glory, and then a piercing shriek, and then a mighty fanfare for the waking of the dead or the death of the living. Like,
Wow,
pretty
that
cool.
man's a poet.
I know, he liked it. Yeah. He liked the trombone very much. And it's a very versatile instrument, which is why I love it so much. Because you can be the epic one, or you can do some comedy with it. It's really great, and anything in between.
Yeah.
So to rein it into, my experiences with nerves and things like that, I have placed a lot of expectations on myself to do everything as perfectly as possible. So I was getting very rigid in my playing. I was like, no, this note needs to be, needs to come out right away. And my tongue was doing weird things, and I was starting to do a thing that's called tongue stopping, which I know you know what that is, but for the audience, it's when you kind of cork the sound rather than just let it go. You like cork it in a very abrupt manner.
Yep.
Because I was doing that because I needed the next note to come out just so, so I was managing way too much rather than I was putting in way too much effort to master what I was doing. So, and I still catch myself doing that. It's a habit you have to really undo, like unravel, you have to untangle that knot, and that takes a while.
And we both have, more than 10 years of, playing experience under our belts, and that's 10 years of habits.
Yep. Yeah. And it's important to recognize that we have 10 years of good habits too. It's not just, we haven't just dug a grave for ourselves this whole time.
And it's important to know that, even though, we're kind of in, I don't even really know where to categorize where we're at in our musical careers, because I feel like we're about, in a similar place.
Yeah. We're both, part-time freelancers essentially. So.
Right. But that doesn't mean you can't learn new tricks.
Absolutely.
And fix the any bad habits you might have had.
Correct. Yeah. So we both have what's known as the growth mindset, which is great and can be dangerous too. Like everything has yin and yang. Everything has a good quality and some pitfalls that you got to make sure you're not stepping in. So a growth mindset is great. It means you're willing to adapt and change and get better constantly. But it can also come with the expectation that you will get better constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start placing expectations on yourself, that's literally a weight that you're putting on top of what you're trying to do. And it's, it's halting that progress sometimes. Now, that being said, you shouldn't be like a pessimist where you don't expect to get better. Because a lot of people try to use that reverse psychology of like, well, I just don't care. It's like, no, you're just protecting your emotions.
Right. There is a balance to be had there.
Yeah.
If you're the pessimist, you say you just don't care, then what's motivating you to get in the practice room?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So, yeah, there's all that. And then, so recently, this past month in May, I took a few auditions for some more major orchestras because I'm mostly an orchestra player. That's my that's what pays me most often and what I practice most often. So I work that up and I try to, up that game as much as I can. That being said, are you familiar with how orchestra auditions work?
I haven't done one in a very long time.
Right.
But are they still kind of doing the blind aspect of it?
Yeah,
nowadays?
So I'll walk folks through. So it's you, depending on the I don't know, perceived prestige of the orchestra, there's a few rounds of auditioning. So the first round is often called a resume round. So you don't even go there yet. You send in your resume to show them what you have done and what you're capable of, who you studied with. Sometimes that's important. Usually not, but when it comes down to it, they do want to see that. So luckily my resume some denied me, some didn't feel that I was Because sometimes being a freelancer is detrimental because you do a little bit of a lot of things,
Hmm.
which means you're not a specialist. And orchestras require specialists usually.
So they prefer that you had some prior experience with just you're in this one orchestra almost full time.
Right. Yeah. Or at least like, yeah, you're the permanent trombonist of Kalamazoo for the last, 10 years,
Yeah.
whatever. Um, which they have a pretty good symphony. So that's a good resume right there.
Ooh.
Yeah. So they have that. And followed by, if they do invite you, sometimes you're also required to supply recordings. Sometimes they have a recorded round,
Yeah.
which my recordings have never passed. Like, and even you'd think recordings, right? You get to make it as perfect as you can,
Yeah.
which I hate. I hate recording.
Join the club, man.
Yeah, I know it's just a thing you have to do. Um, yeah, it's like making a portfolio for artists. It's like nobody wants to do it. It feels
Right.
very dehumanizing almost.
And
Um,
even part of that is the where you feel like even if you just recorded something like 6 months ago, that you're already a different player than you were.
yeah.
Then you're like, oh, here's this recording. It's all I've got. But, don't judge me too hard because this is
Hmm.
I feel like I'm different than this already.
Exactly. Yeah. I had that conversation with another person I talked to about performance. um, so you do that. If you're invited, cool. Then you show up, and there's usually like 3 rounds in the actual location. So you're usually put into a group warm up room, which is the worst thing ever because
Ooh.
all you do is listen to people be better than you. um, a lot of folks have stopped. Uh, Organizations haven't stopped putting you in those rooms, but a lot of auditioners, they do a little quick warm up and then they usually just chill out because what happens after that is you're given time in a personal practice room to warm up and prepare yourself.
Hmm.
So you don't really need to be in the bullpen, like that. It's strange.
Interesting.
Yeah, a lot of it's just to make sure it's going according to schedule. And they do them in rounds, in groups. So they'll do a group of like 6, 7 people and then take a 20-minute break because the committee is who's listening to every single auditioner. There's usually between 5 to like 9 people
Hmm.
listening to everybody. And that is a pretty high stakes thing. You're hiring your colleague, right? So you want
Yeah.
to make sure you are being at your best as a discerning listener and giving everyone a fair chance. So they need breaks too because that's quite mentally taxing on them.
Yeah.
So this committee, when you actually do go into the room, they are behind a screen. They don't see you, and you don't see them. There's a proctor that goes in with you and like says your number. You're given a number,
Hmm.
says your number, and usually there's a list of a few excerpts from big pieces that they want you to play that showcase all the different aspects of your playing. Can he or she or they play, can they play high and fast? Can they play low and quiet? Can they play really beautifully? Can they play kind of, more aggressively when the music calls for it? Can they do
Hmm.
everything more or less? And that's where you heap on the expectation of like, well, I have to play it all perfectly because that's how you get a job.
Yeah.
um, and by trying too hard, you sabotage yourself in certain ways, and it's a whole system of failure you have set up for yourself. That's from personal experience. So you play, and then you just go wait and finish for your group to finish playing, or wait for your group to finish playing. And then they'll usually walk in and say, okay, from group, A or whatever, numbers 6 and 8, you have advanced to the second round. The rest of you, sorry, that's it. Like, so I do
Yeah.
have a little tradition of after auditions, I go get ice cream, like just give myself a little treat type of thing.
Yeah.
Because it's hard. It's really hard because you prepare. A lot of the books I have to prepare for these kinds of things are sports psychology books. They're not even about music. Um, Because you
Yeah.
learn most of what you need to from your teachers, and you know how to practice your instrument, and you know what the music is supposed to sound like. That usually is part of the training of music school. What they don't always train you on, or what they don't know how to, or what you don't get enough experience with, is this mental side of it, which is kind of what we're focusing on today.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I don't remember. I think we only ever had like one convocation about like performance anxiety, and where like our teachers sat around and were like telling us about kind of what
Mm-hmm.
they go through when they are about to get up on stage.
Right.
And otherwise, I can't really remember music school teaching us really anything about how to manage our mental state while we're playing at
Uh-huh.
all.
Yep, it is. It is difficult, and then
Which is a big shame because
you're expected
it's
to perform.
yeah.
Sorry, I
Yeah.
cut you off, but it's a shame because
It's a shame because it's such like a, I can't put like a number to it, but it's a huge percentage of what makes like the delineation between good music and bad music is like this mental state of the musician that's playing it. So many musicians are described, at least like really good musicians are described as being like joyful on stage
mm,
or something like that. They'll, instead of the audience member commenting on the sound of, the instrument, they'll comment on, oh, they looked like they were having a good time.
yeah,
They looked like they were enjoying themselves. They looked like they could put out that sort of energy all the time. And
or my favorite, the
yeah,
accidental insult when someone says that looked hard.
yeah, that looked hard.
They mean well when they say that a lot of the time, but it's like, oh no.
Yeah, that means that you looked like you were beat red in the face and sweat was coming down.
Right.
And you know, it's it's so funny how like just the character of you, the disposition of you on stage can affect how people think something happened.
Hmm.
There's plenty of players out there that they practice something so many times that something as complicated as Flight of the Bumblebee or um, Donna Lee or something like that sounds effortless to them.
Hmm.
Um, and an audience member might be tricked into thinking that it's easy.
Yep.
Um,
That's happened to me more than once. I'll hear when I was in high school, we had to do a transcription project, and I chose Wycliffe Gordon, a piece by like a solo by Wycliffe Gordon, because he plays so with so much personality and like so much, it draws you in. It's fun to listen to. It's great, and I was really into it. And I'm
yes.
like, oh, I want to do that. And then when you get into the weeds of it, you're like, oh my god, this guy is something else. Like this isn't human. You can't do that.
Yeah.
But
I
it helps you
I
learn.
had the
Definitely
chance
helps you learn.
of yeah. I had the chance of hearing Wycliffe live a few months ago,
Very cool.
and he was performing at UWGB Jazz Fest.
Oh, nice.
Um, yeah, and I was lucky enough to be a guest clinician up there.
Very cool.
Um, but then later, I got to be the other way around, where Wycliffe was up on stage and teaching all the high school students that were there and listening to what he had to say.
Amazing.
Um,
So,
so yeah, fantastic guy, fantastic player. But the energy was like if you could explain or describe him in one word, it would totally be energy.
absolutely. And that's something that often helps with the anxiety stuff we're talking about is when you feel so like centered in yourself, like you're so comfortable in what you're doing
Mm-hmm.
that all you're doing is just, it's like it's show and tell. You're like, hey guys, hey all you friends, look at this cool thing I have. Like, look at this cool thing. Like, A lot of the
Yeah.
time, they're just presenting some awesome music. They're not even like, some people are like, look at me, look how cool I am. And that works too. It's whatever fits you, whatever is what you are and what you want to do and that you're comfortable with.
Hmm.
So, but the blind audition stuff is where I really got like, I don't get nervous in the term of fear. I work with high schoolers like 200 at a time. Like, so public speaking and, things like that doesn't do it for me anymore. It's fine. Um,
Hmm.
and I've been, like a boss. I've had the title of manager a few times in my life. So like, I'm not scared of interaction or anything like that. Uh, or I don't get fear, I should say. What I do get though is adrenaline. Like I just feel the importance of the moment, and my body reacts to that.
Yeah.
Usually with the shakes, and brass playing in particular is so central. Your musculature, your face is so central to what you're doing. Um, because you play saxophone, and yes, you have an embouchure, the shape your mouth makes when you play, which uses your musculature, but the reed is the thing that vibrates.
Hmm.
Brass players, we are the thing vibrating. So if we're not, you know, if we're locking up, then there's nothing happening. And I know that happens
Right.
to saxophone players too, in particular, because you start to lock up and you shut the reed down and nothing can move, and
It's
so,
certainly different, but the fact that it's that the flesh in your lip is the thing that's actually vibrating,
right.
it just makes, like, you can clench down on a reed and it'll sound like stuffy or forced,
Hmm.
but I feel like if you tense up to that in that manner, you're not getting any sound at all.
No, no. Um, yeah, and we have every instrument has what's called partials, which is like floors in a building, which each note family lives on, and so
Hmm.
and for our lips, you guys get more or less you have buttons for that. Um,
Yep.
whereas brass players, our lips are doing it's acrobatic, it's micro acrobatics that we're doing inside the mouthpiece.
Hmm.
So that's another reason why sports psychology is so huge in all musicians, but particularly brass players, because we feel the most athletic. I'm not saying the most fit or the most, like gung ho, but like it's the the activity of making music for us is the most active, I think, out of most instruments. Micro active, but still like it's our body doing the most things.
Yeah,
So
I would agree.
yeah. So when you're
Um,
nervous, when you're shaky, like I fought martial arts when I was a kid. I did tournaments and earned a black belt and did all that. I got nervous during tournaments and stuff, but you get to use your gross motor movement, and you can win a fight sloppy. Like
mhm.
you can win a fight in an ugly way. You can't win an audition by playing in an ugly way. You can't just survive an audition and make it out on top. Sadly, you have to
Mhm.
be in control, or you have to be comfortable the whole time. You have to present your best the whole time. Most of the time, they do forgive minor blips because they understand that we're just people. But overall,
Right.
you got to be able to present what's in your heart, what's in your head, what comes out of your body in the best light. So uh,
Yeah.
it's a lot of pressure that at least you put on yourself. So when I walk into that room, it's usually a big room with a screen and the stand with the music. Like that's it. So you walk in, and the way I feel it is you just feel this expectation hanging in the room. And it's not that they're waiting. It's not like NASCAR where they want you to crash to make some excitement, right?
Yeah.
uh, and I'm sure most NASCAR fans don't feel that way. It's just the
It's the prevailing joke.
right, exactly, yeah. Um, but it's not. They are rooting. They want to be done. Like they want to be like, I like this person, and like they want the choice to be made for them, right? They want to just
Right.
they're rooting
Yeah.
for everyone. The next person could be the one. They're rooting for everybody who walks in the door. So it's not like you know, there's no guns under the table that they're waiting to like execute you with. Um, although I don't know, there's a screen, so I don't know. But um, but you walk in, and whether it's good vibes or bad, you still get that aura of expectation in the room, and that kind of turns on the primal part of
Yeah.
us that's like, oh man, something's happening. Got to be, the fight or flight stuff. So it's
Yeah.
and then the question becomes, and sometimes that happens when I have solos in general, like during the solo ensemble contest in school, or when I did my recitals in college and graduate school. Sometimes when I stand up to play a solo in like a big band or something, um, you just get that. There's the importance of it, at least perceived, is what gets you.
Hmm.
Because you want to be able to show your best self at all times.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with that? Is kind of what you asked.
Yeah. I mean, it, it's interesting that
And I have answers.
you
But
character
yeah.
yeah, you characterize your nervousness in a much more like natural way than I've heard other people um, describe it.
Really? What
It seems
can
like
you
in a much
expand?
more general sense,
Okay.
like the room has a vibe that's putting like a pressure on you. The pressure of your own expectations or perhaps others. Um, but I've heard students say like, you know, eh, they could point to like a specific person in the room and say like, man, I'm freaking out because my professor's here, or I'm freaking out because there's 500 people, in the concert hall listening to you.
Yeah.
Or I'm, in the case of the audition, of course, all eyes are on you. Um, but
Metaphorically, all ears are on you. Yeah.
yeah, your eyes don't care what's happening.
Right. Right. And that is kind of a
uh,
cool thing because they have a screen and they put down carpet so they can't see you. They don't know like what kind of shoes you're wearing. It's anyone
wow,
can win, which is a great thing.
that's
But that does
that's
come with
cool.
its own. It feels rather dehumanizing. Like they do what they
Yeah.
can, right, to make you comfortable. But at the end of the day, you're kind of just a number.
Hmm.
You're a
Hmm.
number and either a green check mark or a red X. Like that's really what it comes down to. Um,
Yeah.
which can hurt sometimes, Even, I'm a pretty resilient guy. I've gone through a lot in my life. Um, Luckily, nothing as traumatizing as some people have. Like, I don't have a story about my family or anything like that. It's just, I've
Hmm.
recovered from a, back surgery in my late 20s, when every doctor was like, you're too young to really be having this kind of pain, that kind of stuff. Uh,
Yeah.
and you don't survive music school without a bit of a brass neck. You gotta, at least as a
Yeah.
performer, Um, and
Hmm.
and I'm a freelance player, right? You gotta be a little bit tough because there's a whole game with freelancing of like, well, they hired this person instead of me. What does that mean? You can get into that whole
Oh, you can
thing.
get very tangled up that way. Yeah.
Right, right. Try not to, obviously, because ultimately nothing like that really happens or matters. But or if there is politics, like why do you even want to be a part of that whole mess? But a
Yep.
lot of it's to get a paycheck, understandably so. So, um, I do, yeah, and I get nervous when there's a big crowd or like I'll demonstrate for like I coach the brass players at one of these high schools, and we'll have
Hmm.
an all brass master class type thing, and I'll demonstrate stuff for them. Uh, and of course, when I demonstrate for students, you're supposed to demonstrate the correct thing and
Yeah.
be able to exactly portray what you're talking about, put your money where your mouth is type stuff. Um, so yeah, you do feel it's that little ball. Usually for me, it's like right where like the bottom of my sternum, like right under my sternum, is where it kind of feels that little, uh, whatever you want to call that.
It, it don't even know what to call, but it feels like an object is there almost sometimes, right?
Yeah, how I would describe it, you know those little they're like little balls, but they're not confetti, almost like little like ribbon balls. Like you usually you have them on like those ugly sweaters and things like that.
Oh, yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like it looks like a little firework made of ribbons or something, but
Hmm. Hmm.
it's like that, but it's about, big as your heart or a little less, but like little ball-sized piece of anxiety or whatever you want to call it, that spike, that flare of something's important and I need to be good now, you know. Um and I feel it quite often. I used to fight it and it used to backfire because it will win because it is me, right? It's not,
Yeah.
we treat it like this external thing, but it is you ultimately. There's just a part of yourself doing that.
And fighting it is actually, at least to me, telling your body that something's wrong,
Right. Right.
right? So you're like, oh my gosh, I have this feeling. This feeling is bad. So
Mm-hmm.
then you start trying to fight it, and then your body's like, oh, it's bad? Oh, here's some more, right?
Right.
Like this
Right.
is important.
Right.
Must
Because
be
it is.
really important.
It is. You do get pumped with the actual chemical of adrenaline, and that is
Yeah.
not good for like your fine skills, right? That you need for the arts.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's for like running and punching and stuff
Yeah.
like that.
Lifting heavy objects.
Exactly right. It's useful. We need it, but not when you're playing an instrument, unless the
Yeah.
piano like falls on top of you as you're doing it. I don't know, but you, but learning to live with you kind of accept it and you live with it. Again, not in a pessimistic way of giving up to it. You're not giving into it. You're just going, okay, it's there. Cool. Fine.
Yeah.
Now to go about my business. It's kind of that meme of, oh no. Well, anyway, and you just
Yeah.
you just keep going. You carry on.
Yeah.
And that takes training. You can't just do that. You can't just decide I'm going to do that and then you do it. Because I tried that at one audition, and it totally backfired. Because all you're doing is concentrating. You're tugging against yourself,
Hmm.
and you can't concentrate on what you're supposed to be concentrating on,
Right.
and therefore you give a lackluster, performance. Because I tell my students this all the time. Music is a form of like magic with a K, like the the practiced kind.
Yeah.
Um, and we don't need to get into all the esoteric stuff, but like it does, because magic in that definition is something that affects a with an A, affects with an A, affects change in someone, you know. So
Yeah.
music very obviously does that. We have historical evidence, so to speak. Um, so in layman's term, how I approach that with students is I go, look, performing is just you telling the audience what to think and what to feel. Because that's what they're there for. They're there and allowing themselves to be open enough to accept your instructions because they want to smell what you're cooking. They want to have a taste of what you're
Yeah.
cooking. You know, they want to experience what you have to offer because everyone's looking for, something, some kind of experience other than their own thoughts sometimes.
Hmm.
Uh, and so, that's something to concentrate on. Again, though, that can go too far where you have this expectation of like, well, if I perform poorly, I will, you know, ruin their like destinies or whatever.
Yeah.
I will disrupt the vibrations of the universe and, etc. So everything needs to be done with an ease of mind, with a peace of mind, not this like, protagonist feel of like, well, if I don't do this right, terrible things will happen.
Right.
The good news and
And
the bad news is that nothing happens most times for anything.
right. Um, oh, I just had a thought. Going back to your, um, oh darn, it's slipping away. It has gone. It's totally passed.
It'll come back. It always does.
Yeah.
Okay. Uh, well, it's so funny because you immediately turned this into interviewing me, which I think is hilarious.
I didn't intend on doing that, but I
I know.
actually did want to hear what you had to
Yeah.
say, or
Yeah.
what your personal experience was with anxiety.
Sure. Sure. And I just have a lot to say right now about it because um, I'm opinionated and long-winded in general, but also because, but also because I've been focusing on this particular thing for the last, half a year at least.
Hmm.
So, so it's important, and I just have a lot of knowledge and a lot of insight from it at this point. Not as much as some, but I have some stuff to say. That's for sure. Uh, I did get to meet with a man named Kirk Ferguson. He's the associate principal trombone in the Milwaukee Symphony.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so
I
he's
know
not.
Kirk. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So he is an amazing musician. He's an amazing human being. Just overall, he's one of my
yeah.
favorite people that I've ever met. He's really cool. He's like an actual Buddhist. Like,
Oh, he is.
yeah,
I didn't know that.
yeah. He's not like into Buddhism. He is a Buddhist. um, so I guess you could say he's into Buddhism, but like for real.
Actually, in it.
But yes, he's in it. Not even into it. He's in it. Yeah, exactly. Just proof that you can do it and keep your hair. So
Oh. uh, I know Kirk from, he plays in this second line New Orleans kind of band
oh
called
yeah.
Little Lake Stompers.
Hmm. I haven't
And
heard
I've
them, but I've heard
subbed in
of
that
them.
group
Yeah,
a couple times.
that's
Yeah.
fantastic. Yeah. So you know him. You know he's a really just chill, awesome dude.
Yeah.
Um, he is also a uh, expert, I suppose you could call him, at this kind of stuff. He's written multiple articles about this. He sent me one that he had published in the International Trombone Association journal some years ago. Um,
Hmm.
I guarantee you he's intimately familiar with the book Effortless Mastery. Uh,
Yeah.
he's also a very big proponent of the methods of a man named Dr. Don Green, if you've heard of him at all.
Can't say I have.
That's okay. So Dr. Green is a performance coach. He actually works, maybe he doesn't anymore, but during the time of most of his writing, when he wrote all these books that he has, he was a sports psychologist, and he actually left that because he was hired to work at Juilliard to become a performance coach in general,
Huh.
specific to musicians, but performance coach overall. And so he has all these methods and things you can utilize. And that's something I like a lot because I'm a philosophical person, and I know you are as well. But sometimes entertaining a thought and actually implementing those thoughts into action can be a long time coming, you know?
Yep.
Um, and in the performance world, you oftentimes, more often than not, need something that you can just use right now.
Yep.
I would argue, because deadlines, especially as a freelancer, deadlines are just ever approaching.
Yep.
So you need to be able to execute at a high level in a short amount of time. And so uh, a lot of his things are more physically grounded. And I found out that my method, my personal just way of going about things, is very physically grounding. It's very physically grounded. I'm not huge on traditional meditation where you kind of just sit and observe thoughts, things like that.
Sure.
Mindfulness meditation. I like it. I appreciate it. I recommend it to many, but it's just one of those things that doesn't stick with me when I do it. Um, but I have noticed that when I read a book on uh, anatomy specific to trombone players. It's quite an interesting book, um, and that actually helped me so much with my nerves because when you get to have physical, right, like you're like, how does this work? Uh,
Yeah.
for me, right, and this is for others, I'm sure, but like what I experienced because I know I with my brain I know all this stuff. Um, but knowing you can just accept your nerves and all that stuff doesn't stop them from, you know, there's that disconnect.
Yeah.
um, or at least it takes more time than I had to be able to form that cohesion with knowing and integrating into your body. I'm a
Uh,
very body
yeah.
conscious type of person. I think that comes from the martial arts training. To be honest, I just know my body is me. You know.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
there's a reason they call that stuff a practice.
right. Exactly. Right.
You
You have
know,
to
because
keep
so
doing it
you're
over
like,
time.
oh, I need this, like, this solution that's going to come a little quicker. And it's like, well, okay, you can practice mindfulness meditation, but like, you're probably not going to see the benefits of that for 6 months or
Exactly.
something like that, you know?
Right. And still do it. Like for those that are on the fence, like um,
Absolutely.
you won't know until you actually try. Like that's the other part of it is like all these things we do to help ourselves. We tend to not do enough to actually get the benefits.
Right. You do it for, maybe a couple of weeks and you're like, hey, I'm not seeing any changes, or if the changes you are seeing are not very abrupt,
Right.
then you like, oh, maybe it's just not for me. Well, the growth comes from those long-term habits
Hmm.
and rewiring the brain, which is really kind of what we're doing is, to rewire it um, to be conscious of our present moment
Hmm.
and observe our thoughts. That that's a habit that we're forming, to be conscious of those things.
Absolutely.
And
Um,
like trying to get that to happen suddenly when you're under stress of performance, like, that's a whole other game.
mhm. It is, and it's frustrating. And then you end up kind of regressing or falling into a new form of stress because you have again this expectation that it should be working and yet it's not, and then
Yeah.
it all kind of
What's
blows up in your
wrong with
face.
me? This works for other people, that sort
Right.
of thing.
It's Zuko trying to shoot lightning all over again. Like
Yeah.
that really is. I mean, that show is so great for a reason because it demonstrates all these things very, very physically, right? Like we're talking about just a mental shift, but they get to demonstrate it by like, why can't I shoot this natural force from my
On my
fingertips out my
fingertips.
fingertip? I love the more external versions of internal concepts that they do in that show. Uh,
Yeah.
so yeah, so I found out I do meditate. I love it very much. I know it helps, but what helps me more in the moment, because meditation is just a nice, you know, you're you're sun tanning, you know, but when you need,
Yeah.
uh, yeah, but when what I need in the moment is like I'm very attached to my body. So when I feel my body getting uh, angsty like that, then
Yep.
I associate with it because that's just what I do. And I've learned to accept that. Like I used to think, well, I shouldn't do that. And that's just, it just isn't helpful to try and swim against that tide.
Yeah.
So, sorry, you're going to say something?
It, it sounds a lot like, um, in kind of the therapy world, it sounds like a what we call a wellness and action plan,
Okay.
where basically you say you plan for whatever discomfort you might feel doing something. You say,
Mm-hmm.
okay, when I'm in a good, like a calm state right now, I can like, sit down, write down, okay, what's the thing I'm going to do? What am I going to feel like when I'm attempting to do it? And then now that you have this like plan written down saying what your real expectations are, what is really going to happen in that moment, it doesn't become a surprise when it actually happens. So you're like, okay, I'm going to get up on stage and my solo is going to come up and I'm going to stand up and I'm going to feel, this ball of anxiety in my chest, maybe my fingers are sweating and I can't quite move them as fast as I would like. But it's not surprising. I know that's going to happen. And that kind of keeps you from spiraling down that, oh no, what's happening to my body? I have to
Mhm.
worry about this now. And then suddenly we're cascading into worse and worse and worse anxiety.
Precisely. Yeah. So that when you do feel that, you just in your head you're just crunk going, "Oh yeah, it's all coming together." And you just
Yeah.
go. Oh, to have the like personality of crunk. Just
Oh man, sometimes, yeah, you just want to shut off all the extra voices and you want to say squeak squeak 'em, squeak squeakity.
it
And
exactly. And just make spinach
yeah,
puns for your friends.
yes.
Oh, so yeah, I learned to because I associate so hard with my body, because that was just an important thing in my formative years. Because I did martial arts like from I think middle school through my high school, through high school. So what is that? Not, I guess, terribly long, maybe 5, 6 years. Not a super long time in the span of my whole life, but the formative years, right? Like when I was a teenager, when you kind of become who you are, more or less, um,
Hmm.
and gain the more physical habits. It's when you're a teenager that you gain your physical habits more often than not.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, it's when your body gets to do the most stuff, and you just kind of learn what you like to do.
Yeah.
Um, you can still, teach your body things into old age, but you know, as a teenager, you just kind of you start seeing what you want to do and trying stuff. And as a preteen too, like you do all the, I want to play baseball now, and I want to play soccer, and then I want to try piano or whatever, and then you realize piano lessons involve sitting for hours and hours.
Oh
Oh,
no.
either way, yeah. Uh, so I got really attuned to my body, because I can make it do all these cool things. And I have learned that that's how I play trombone too. I'm a very physical player. Uh, that's sometimes not good because I do tend to assert control where it shouldn't be asserted.
Hmm.
Um, but also, it's a great thing because I am really attuned to, I have pretty good posture, and my slide technique is pretty good. Just all the physical attributes.
Yeah.
I have learned to use that, and I'm a visual thinker as well. So I think a lot in spatial terms, in imagining spaces, things like that.
Yeah.
Uh, I actually once tried. Are you familiar with the Mind Palace mnemonic?
So I've heard this before, but I'm not familiar entirely.
That's okay. Yeah, it was the story of it, of how it came about, and you'll understand what it is from ancient Greece. I forget which man, it came from, but he was at a dinner party with like a long table and all the guests along the table,
Hmm.
and he had to excuse himself to go like across town for something, and he was going to come back. And in that time, I think there was like maybe it was a fire or an earthquake or something destroyed the the place and like
Oh,
killed everybody.
geez.
um, and he came back and was able to recall to the authorities the list of the dead by imagining the table and where they were sat. Right. So
Oh,
here's
okay.
the
Yeah.
list from my spatial, because psychologically speaking, I find this super fascinating. Uh, our spatial awareness is like one of our deepest, things as a species.
Hmm.
Um, and so we can use that to enhance our upper level thinking.
Yeah.
So and usually it's like you imagine weird stuff in a space. So I still remember to this day a list I made myself. This was my senior year in college at Oshkosh. Um, so this would have been 2013, I think, 2014.
Hmm.
Um, I had to, so I imagined my house, the famous brass house.
The
the
infamous brass
Yeah,
house.
that's a more apt term. The infamous brass house. Uh, So inside joke for those who might be listening. It's a house that 4 brass players lived in and had many shenanigans occur. But I
That's
had,
as far as you'll take that. Yeah.
right, yeah, yeah. It was a college house full of dudes. What do you want?
Yeah.
So, um, so I imagined. So let's see. There's the kitchen table, which has a big mound of quarters on it because I have to do laundry this week. There, yeah. So you associate, like, you put a picture in there, and you
Yep.
associate it with stuff. So, there was Joseph Alessi practicing in the living room because I had to practice and I wanted to emulate him. He's the principal trombonist of the New York Philharmonic, considered one of the best in the world. So obviously trying to emulate that. So he was
Mm-hmm.
practicing in the living room and I got to practice. Next to him was a group called the Maniacal Four Trombone Quartet because I had to get back to them via email to finish like the writer contract because they were going to come perform at UW Oshkosh, and that was my
Oh, yeah.
responsibility. Yeah, for that club we were in. So I had to email them. In the bathroom, there was a cow, and coming out of the shower was a palm tree. Or yeah, um, yes, because I needed to get milk, and the palm tree was because I was stupid and didn't realize that pineapples don't grow on palm trees. But I was going to buy a pineapple.
Oh, no.
Yeah, but I learned, I know. But the palm tree is in there, right? So tropical, pineapple, whatever.
Yeah. It got
Uh,
you there.
exactly, yeah. So, and there were some other things like I have one of my old apartment, so not the house, but the apartment, where I open the door and my graduate professor is sitting there playing alto trombone because I needed to finalize the purchase of said alto trombone because I bought one of his instruments at one point. So just a whole like mnemonic device of spatial awareness attached to our memory. Um,
Yeah.
and so I think
That's
that
like
way a
those
lot.
people that every year there's that competition to see how many digits a person can memorize.
Mm-hmm. You know how
And
they
they
do it?
memorize
You
like
know the trick to that?
thousands. I don't remember the term for that. What is it? Is there a term for
The
that?
I don't remember the term, but do you know the trick to it?
I thought it was like every digit was like an object.
Usually,
But
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Either that or I've heard it. People choose how they want to do it, but
Yeah.
um, yeah, either every digit is an object or every string of digits like reminds you of a. I know
Yeah,
one
like
one
you group
person
them
used
in
like
groups
running
of
times.
4 or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or I've heard it done where every digit is a character, like a personality.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So you like have this narrative in your head of how all these
Yeah.
personalities are interacting. Yeah,
Still blows my mind.
I know. I actually use that one when I'm memorizing music. Each note in the scale kind of has its personality. So
Oh, no
it's
way.
every note is a character interacting.
That's
Yeah,
crazy to me.
it is. So that's how I think, right? It's very story driven, very visual. And I attach that to my body somehow. I don't know why exactly, but
Yeah.
it's just probably because my body exists in space. And so I attach, I externalize my brain that way.
Yeah.
Um, so that being said, I learned to manage my nerves that way a little bit. So I don't externalize the nerves necessarily. I let them live inside because to try and rip them out and put them somewhere else, that seems like a lot of work that you're going to be
Yeah.
fighting to keep doing. So I let it live there. It just exists there, and that's okay.
Hmm.
And something I learned from Kirk was he likes to do this thing where the trombone has a slide, so it's a very kinesthetic instrument.
Yeah.
Uh, and so you blow from your lips, you blow to your hand, so as if you're like catching the air,
Oh,
that kind of
yeah,
a
yeah.
thing. Yeah. Or you imagine the bell, projecting and ringing out, um,
Yep.
whatever it is. But very visual thought, so that you attach it to your activity, and you can really. It's just asserting your focus onto something that isn't the nerves. The nerves can still exist, but you don't have to give them that attention.
Yep.
So that way you can just do what you need to do, allow them to exist because they're gonna, and that's fine, you know.
Mm-hmm. It's
Um,
like you're in a room and you have something over here that you want to focus on,
mhm.
but they can still be, you know, a wolf in the corner,
Right.
but like, yeah, it's there, but I'm over here. I'm over here. I'm doing this
Hmm. Yeah. And if the wolf like raises the hackles, then you can maybe do what you need to do to address it. But like
now. Yeah,
if you know it's just gonna sit there until you address it, or once you're done with the thing, it'll just walk out the door, right? Like,
right. Well, that's the silly part is in giving the wolf the attention, it gets angrier
right,
usually when it comes to
right,
nerves. So it's just like, well, if you do your thing over here and let the wolf be in the corner, usually it will be as docile as it can be.
exactly. Yep. So it's funny what we have to go through. We resist that so much, trying to think like, no, it can't be that. It has to be something I can do, like assertively.
Yeah.
Um, it has to be something I can do to like make it go away.
Hmm.
Uh, that was me for a long time with unpleasant interaction. Because I'm good with people, and like nobody likes, you know, like if you have to break up with somebody or if you have to deliver bad news or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Um, Nobody likes that, but I really don't like it. It makes me feel like I'm a bad person. And I know
Hmm.
I'm not alone in that. So it's a normal experience for a lot of folks. Um, but I became obsessed with like not. I like when people like me, right? And sometimes that goes too far, um, where I'll overcommit to something and underdeliver because I shouldn't have overcommitted. That kind of
Yeah.
stuff. Uh, and so I also have a lot of books on. So there's books on sports psychology. There's books on regular psychology. There's books on communication in particular. Like I hate sales to the bottom of my bones. I hate
Oh my
sales,
gosh.
but I have books on sales because it is how to effectively, you know, get a point across and communicate with someone, getting them on your
Yeah.
side, right? That's kind of what it's about. Because I don't want people to hate me, and I've gone to the extreme of studying how to make that happen, uh, or how not to make that happen, I guess. Um, it's also made me a better teacher and communicator in general. So it has made me a better person. But the seed of it comes from I don't want people to not like me. Uh, and so you kind of obsess over if I just had the right words, then I could make this problem go away and everyone would be happy. So I take
Yeah.
it on myself like, well, it's clearly my fault because I don't have the right words. I didn't say this thing correctly to to make it all better. When in reality, sometimes it's just not going to be good and you have to just put the information out there and then it's up to the other person to fucking
Yep.
deal with it.
Yeah. You can you can commit no errors and still lose.
Yes. Thank you, Picard. Absolutely.
Yeah.
What a smart show. Yeah. So exactly. So and that goes straight into performing too, right? You can commit no errors and still come across as flat.
Yeah.
So it's a whole thing. So you brought all this up with Kenny Werner's stuff, Effortless Mastery.
Yeah.
And I read the book, I own the book, I read the book. And have you let's flip this back to you now because you asked me about my experience with all this.
Hmm.
Um I'm very curious and I have some thoughts, but I want to hear your perspective on have you tried what he's talking about or have you tried other like what's your experience up to this point with all that?
I will get to that right after I turn some lights on in here. It
Oh,
got dark.
absolutely. Yeah, I suppose the night is descending.
Yes.
Now would be a good time for sponsors, but we don't have any. If you wanna, go to our Patreon.
All right. I feel like it's daytime again.
Perfect. I'm just chilling here in my bat cave. I'm happy with it.
Nice.
Uh, so yeah, what prompted you to, check out his philosophy? What experiences have you had with performance anxiety, um, as you develop on your instrument and as you're a professional musician, so what do you got? What's all that?
So when I was in music school, I guess when we were in music school, um, I had what I would describe as crippling performance anxiety. Um, and I don't know how obvious or not obvious that may have been um, from the outside, but it was to the point where I like experienced physical pain, um, either during or even after performances. Um, and we didn't get much, counseling or anything on that from our teachers, basically at all.
No, and actually, I did want to ask you about that too, because um, unlike me in school, you had three teachers, because one retired, then there was like an interim one, and then they hired a new one.
So I actually never got a chance to study with Drew Whiting.
Oh, okay. So you had two. You had two
So I
teachers.
had
Yeah.
two. I graduated and he took over. But yeah, I
Right.
had Dr. Giannakopoulos, and then he retired. And then I had Sarah Kind,
Hmm.
who was, I believe she had her master's from Lawrence, I want to say.
Sure.
Um, and, both great teachers. I'd say that Dr. Giannakopoulos was old school and was just like, ah, you'll get over it. Or, you just muscle it your way through it. You pull yourself up by your bootstraps sort of guy,
Right.
Um, and in some respects, he was correct in the fact that the more you do it, the easier it becomes. And it's that familiarity
Hmm.
with the feeling, but also having it become a less and less novel experience as you uh, continue. I remember the first time that the jazz ensemble played in a location that wasn't the uh, you know the performance hall at Oshkosh,
Hmm.
and we played at the Grand Opera House in Oshkosh with
That's right.
Janet Planet, and
Yeah.
it was
For
a
that was a
sold out
Christmas.
show.
That was a Christmas show, right?
Yeah, Christmas show, and it
Yeah.
was it was sold out, and I had never done anything like that before, as I probably most people on that stage had never really done that before, other
Nope.
than Janet and Marty probably.
Right.
And I just remember like almost not being able to stand up for any solos that evening, from shaky knees to like shortness of breath.
Hmm.
Um, so all that to really to say that I've struggled a long time with performance anxiety, um, and it got like better and better and better just as that those repetitions came in, because I didn't we didn't talk about any of this sort of stuff about what to do with your nerves,
Hmm.
if there is something to do with your nerves,
Hmm.
or any philosophy around um, you know how your nerves interact with your performance.
Right.
Uh, so it really took until graduate school before I was like, what am I going to do with all these feelings and all this extra energy that I get? Um, I remember at some point between undergrad and grad school, I decided that um, I was going to frame that nervousness as excitement. I was going to be like, okay, I'm nervous, but I'm excited to play, which was true technically,
Hmm.
but also it kind of diminished the fact that, yeah, I was nervous for these things.
Right.
like truly acknowledging that its existence. It was kind of more of a like a you obfuscate the wolf with like a like a cute hat on top of it or something, right? You're
Right.
just like, it's over there. I'm scared, but it's funny. Like I'm excited, right?
Right.
Um, so uh, it it helped, but like it was definitely more of a crutch than it was like a real thing.
I
Um,
agree. Yeah. I think I mentioned something close to that with like, well, you can decide anything you want, but it doesn't change the
right.
right.
It doesn't change the physicality of the feeling in your body.
Right.
Um,
So you say you got better and you did it more and more. Was that because you soloed a lot? And I don't know if that was because, let me ask you, did you do it as a, like, were you testing yourself constantly? It's like, well, if I'm going to get better at this, I need to do more of it. Like, was that a mental choice and you just had to keep testing your skills against adversity? Or was it you were like, I will if no one else does, and like nobody else ever did?
I think it really came from like my desire to solo came from and still does come from the fulfillment of imagining something and having it come to fruition.
Yeah.
And it's that self actualization of being like, okay, I have this idea in my brain. And even if that idea only comes a half a second before it happens, which was the ideal situation,
Hmm.
right? Or to have like no gap at all.
Right.
Uh, to have that come to fruition and have it to be exactly what you thought it was going to be, which of course, even as a professional now, does not always happen,
No.
right? Uh, it that there's like a in kind of like intimate words, there's like some ecstasy there. There's
Hmm.
some ecstasy of just saying or of experiencing that translation of thought to music out in the world. So I was, shooting for that, realizing that the whole time I was terrified of the onlookers, the people that were, judging that, because
Sure.
I deeply feared the judgment, um, and that's where that anxiousness comes from. Um, the reason it got better was because of the frequency, um, and which makes it possible for me to be a professional now, like nowadays.
Hmm.
Because there's gigs now that I don't care, right? Like we play with these weddings, this wedding band that we were talking about before the show. Excuse me. Um, Everyone in the audience is drunk.
Right. Right.
You know, we're playing some Dua Lipa tune I've never heard of because I'm not really that up on pop music
Hmm.
nowadays. Um, and there's nothing more complicated on the page than an eighth note. So it's I'm not concerned with the judgment of the audience, and I'm not
Right.
concerned with the difficulty of the music. So it's
Hmm.
like I don't. There's nothing going on, in the body that's concerning.
Right.
Uh, yeah.
And
Um,
I will interject, and because I've had those experiences too. Um, and a lot of people, when they hear what you just said, go, "Well, then isn't it not fun?" It's like, no, it is. Like you're
yeah.
collaborating with people, you're enjoying making collective sound, and the audience might not be paying attention, but that doesn't mean they're not enjoying what you're doing. It's a
Yeah.
whole You're setting up a whole experience, right? And it doesn't have to be a sit down, focus on me type of concert for that to be a
Yeah.
thing. So I just wanted to make sure that's like in the air, right? Where it's like, well, just because you are supremely comfortable doesn't mean you're not having a heightened sense of things.
Yeah. And there's no reason that simple music can't be good or mastered or done incredibly well.
Hmm.
There's like so I know like going into jazz school,
I want to ask
there's
about that. We'll get to that part. Yeah.
there's a lot of like upturned noses at anything that isn't jazz or isn't kind of more intellectual music.
Hmm.
Um, but that doesn't mean that the band can't be super tight, like everything is lined up perfect. That doesn't mean that there can't be um, cool moments that happen in the music. Of course, pop music's a lot more scripted than jazz is, but that
Hmm.
doesn't mean that a bunch of talented musicians on the stage can't like mess around a little bit, like wiggle around in the space that you're given. Um,
Absolutely. I got
yeah,
I got some praise from an audience. Uh, I forget. I did this tune. Oh, it was like Danny Boy. Something. I did a ballad
yeah,
in front of a band. Because that's like my ballad that I play in front of jazz bands if ever I have to. And and I added like one scoop, like one growly scoop, right? That's all it takes is you just add that one little extra flavor, and everyone goes, "Oh
yeah.
yeah."
They eat it up.
Exactly. The rest of it was pretty by the book, but you add that one little hint of personality, and that's enough, you know.
Yeah.
So I like that a lot. That's a good way of putting it. Um, so basically, just exposure therapy is what really helped you quite a bit. Did you have strategies, like, or was it just you studied and you performed? Like, you didn't think too hard about how they connected. You just practiced, practiced, played, or were you trying stuff? How much control did you have over the process?
It was that way for a while. But then there was a point in grad school where I decided I need to take a closer look at this because I think it's actually holding me back pretty bad.
Okay.
So I decided, okay, I'm going to find some strategies. And one that looked promising to me was trying to emulate the stressful situation in practice so that you're kind of like we were talking about before with the wellness action plan.
Hmm.
I didn't call it that back then, but basically it was, you know, emulating the conditions that you're expecting to perform at and be comfortable there. Know that you can do it there. So it would be like, okay, I'm going to run. I'm going to go for a run and then jump into the practice room and play whatever I need to play.
Nice.
Or I'm going to, um, breathe in and out really fast and like get to the point of, not quite hyperventilation, but, get close and then play something difficult
Hmm.
and know how that feels and prepare for that. And that definitely helped. It's, again, it was like a bunch of exposure therapy sort of things. I still was in that place, unfortunately, of really wanting it to just go away, and decide and like never getting to that point of acceptance of it. I just was like, gosh, I just want this to go away.
Sure.
I want to be done with it, and that
Well,
just made it worse.
don't get me wrong. If I had the choice to just
Oh yeah,
uncheck the box, like I would.
right. Yeah, can I disable that gene from
Right.
my body, please?
Right.
Um, and that's the precarious balance, right? Because like if I press you about it, you're like, well, yeah, duh, I want it to go away.
Hmm.
But in the moment when you're playing, you you can't fight it like that.
Right.
Otherwise, it will just swallow you whole.
Right.
Um, so it's really just been this progressive, slow decline of anxiety that um, has kind of characterized my journey there.
Sure.
But what brought me back to this book, Kenny Werner, was you know that about 3-ish years ago, I moved back up here to Appleton, and I started playing with Marty Robinson again.
Hmm.
And for those of you that don't know, Marty Robinson, um, professor of trumpet at UW Oshkosh, probably the gem of the jazz community in the Fox Valley, Wisconsin, maybe even the Midwest. He's just a fantastic teacher and friend and colleague and composer and trumpeter and pianist, just
Hmm.
all the things you could want.
Absolutely.
Um,
He's a monster player, a monster educator. He is uh, stupendously supportive as well. Um,
Incredibly,
yeah,
yes.
like to this day, you don't have to be a current student for him to be in your corner at all times. It's
Right.
wonderful.
I, I
He's a
still
rare
get,
man.
yeah, I still get like emails where someone says like, "Hey, I got your number from Marty Robinson. I need a saxophone player for this, that, or the other thing." And you're like, "Oh my gosh, Marty's still supporting his students."
Absolutely.
Um, but what I did not expect from coming up here and playing with him again was a weird resurgence of performance anxiety. Um,
I guess he's a person whose opinion really matters to you.
yeah,
Yeah.
it really does. And it's kind of also a weird reminder of um, what undergrad was all about for me. So uh, it just kind of puts those images of being back in the arts and communications building, waiting for your jury, like in the hallway,
Right.
as the next person like walks out and they look dejected, and you're like, oh crap. And you go to go in for your next thing, even though Marty wasn't ever a juror for me, but still, it like kind of brings that all back for me.
Yeah. A music professor is a music professor in the grand scheme. So
Right.
yeah. No, I get that. It's funny. I get to perform. So I'm part of the what is currently the Oshkosh Symphony Orchestra,
Hmm.
which has its rehearsals and performances in that hall. So it's very strange to come back, sit where I used to sit, and play principal
Oh
trombone, and
yeah.
you know, and my teacher Dylan is the orchestra director. Uh, so it's very, yeah, it's interesting. You feel like, wow, I've come a long way. It's nice to be who I am now and get to make music with someone who knows me as I used to be. But
Yeah.
at the same time, when I do screw up, and I do, it's also like, oh, I haven't changed all that much, have I? you know. Oh, and
Yeah.
it's funny because like, yeah, I know what you mean. Where it's like I did have this couple of things. We did this, I don't know, one of the Tchaikovsky symphonies, and there's like it's a short little like it's a duet between the trombone and trumpet as other stuff is going on, but it's exposed and
Hmm.
like short, easy, but it's orchestra work and it's Tchaikovsky, so it needs to sound a certain way.
Yeah.
Aside from being, in time and in tune with good sound, all that, all the basic requisites that can wreck your ego if you're not careful. Um, so, once or twice I biffed it, or I played a wrong note, or I played it too loud because when I get nervous, I tend to want to just, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, that's the only bit of advice that I really remember getting in
yeah,
undergrad was, if you're feeling nervous, don't shy away.
which it's good advice, right?
Yeah.
But you also have to. That's again the know thyself adage. It's like, well, if I get nervous and I play louder naturally, that's bad advice.
That's fair.
Right.
I thought that was the purpose of the trombone,
Well, it's a stigma. It's a stigma, yeah.
though.
Cool. Or and this is a bit of a tangent, but there's this whole discussion around brass playing and brass players in general, with a lot of the unfortunate things that have happened, throughout throughout music history, with
Hmm.
you know uh, sexual assault and all this kinds
Yeah.
of, just all this bad abuse of power and position and patriarchy. Just, I won't get into details, but I'm sure you're mildly aware of a
Yeah,
lot of
I
that.
did hear that story. Yeah.
Right, right. For those that don't know, just the tip of the iceberg, I suppose you could look up an article. I forget what the publication name is, but you could look up the New York Philharmonic sexual assault scandal, and you'll find it. Don't don't worry about that. You will find it. And it's not a scandal. That's not the right word to search. Just New York Philharmonic sexual assault. That's all you got to find.
Yeah.
Because it's not a scandal. It's something that happened, and the people that did it are not under the microscope as much as they ought to be. We'll just say that.
Definitely.
So aside from that, there is this like talk about it's the joke, right? Of brass players are all very testosterone driven.
Yeah.
And it is fun to play loud, but a lot of the time it is like unnecessary. And
Yeah.
yeah, I try to impart on my students, and I'm working on this myself. I try to impart on my students that there is a time and a place for every type of playing. So yeah, there is a time to sound like a chainsaw when it's appropriate, when it's called for in the music, or if you're doing a solo. Like I just did a jazz thing. It was my high school has an alumni performance.
Oh, nice.
Just one tune. We all it's during the jazz concert, and on one tune we all play Chameleon together. Just a nice easy, just a nice easy thing. Everyone knows it, and yeah, during that I got a little raucous, I must admit. But it was my solo, and it was musically appropriate for me to be that way, to play that way.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was playing the head and the outro with everybody playing, then you fit right back in and sound a little more square, like in a good way.
Yeah.
There's a time and a place, and I mean, this can tie into what we're talking about of like, there's a time to acknowledge what's wrong and to address it. There's a time to try and enhance your strengths in order to hide your weaknesses. There's a time to take your weaknesses out and really, really take a look at them.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I don't know. It's because a lot of the time we feel nervous because we are more aware of our weaknesses at that moment. Is usually the case when it comes to me. A lot of the things that got me axed from these auditions was there's a piece I have to play from it's the Organ Symphony, the Third Symphony of Camille Saint-Saëns, and it's this low, slow, long, really pretty bit that the trombone plays in unison with some other instruments, but it's pretty prominent. Technically speaking, super easy. It's in the low register. It's very comfortable. Like, it's fifth grade stuff. It's quarter notes and half notes. Like, it's nothing crazy, but you have to play it so soft and like serenely and clean, but also fluidly. Like, there's all these criteria that have to go with it. And since it is soft and low, that's when my musculature can start to show itself.
Failing you there.
Exactly. Yeah. And the people listening, they're not going, well, he sucks. They're going, oh no, like, we have so many other people that don't shake there, that unfortunately this man can't do it, or this person, because they don't know, that unfortunately this person just they can't pass at this point, So
yeah,
it's no hard feelings, but them's the breaks. Like,
yeah. That brings up, as a musician, there are so many things to focus on and to be good at. Like, my area of study is 100% like hard bop, era sort of, Cannonball, Adderley, into like maybe Kenny Garrett sort of era.
Hmm.
We're talking like the 60s, maybe into the 70s. Those are the people that I study a lot for when it comes to saxophone sound and stuff like that.
Hmm.
But how many other genres of music are there out there for saxophonists
I
to
was going to say that
play?
includes saxophone quite a lot.
Yeah, it's just like there's like when I'm playing with Platinum, this wedding band that I play in. It, I am not a good pop saxophone player. Like I couldn't even tell you like what is a good pop saxophone player. I couldn't even really tell you a name. The only pop saxophone player that I know, and he's not really a pop saxophone player, he just so happens to appear on a pop song. That's Phil Woods,
Right.
on
Who's famous in the jazz community.
who's incredibly famous in the jazz community for owning Charlie Parker's alto saxophone
Right.
and marrying his wife. That's not weird, but we're not going to talk about that.
The ultimate collector, I see.
Right. Um, he appears on "I Love You Just the Way You Are," that
Nice.
that wonderful pop tune. Who I can't remember the composer of. Is that Billy Joel?
I don't
Um,
think so.
is it "I Love You Just the Way"?
Yeah.
It is Billy Joel.
Oh, okay. I don't know my
Uh,
pop stuff very well either. I'll admit
yeah.
right now.
So it's like I only know that because I like Phil Woods in the first place from
Hmm.
being a bebop player.
Right.
But there's that, and then there's like kind of that yakety sax vibe of like the 50s of
Hmm.
the kind of rock and roll thing. There's of course the classical side of saxophone, which I don't really touch anymore, but still have done,
Hmm.
um, where we're playing like contemporary um, classical works. Of course, back when there wasn't too much writing for saxophone,
Sure.
it was all like oboe transcriptions for
Yeah.
some reason.
Either that or the what's often termed experimental music. Yeah.
Right. Where composers are kind of pushing the boundaries of um, what sounds the saxophone can make with pops and growls and multiphonics and
Sure.
things like this,
Yeah.
which
Has
I'm
that
terrible
stuff
at.
well, that stuff has artistic merit, but not always entertainment merit, which matters a lot.
Right.
So
And that could be its own episode all by itself.
right.
Uh, but I think the point I'm trying to make is that there are things that I decide to be good at or decide to work on,
Hmm.
and there's other things that I don't, and that kind of is what shapes you as your own character in the music, right? Um, and what we beat ourselves up so much about what we can't do, and it's like, dude, there's a huge amount that I can't do,
Hmm.
but that does not mean that I'm bad. It's like, sure, maybe I might sound bad if like someone slapped, uh, some sort of, modern classical tune in front of me. Like, oh, you gotta do, this multiphonic, you gotta do this like pops and growls and things like that. Like, well, I can't. Like, give me 6 months, maybe then I'd be able to, do it passively.
Right.
But that's not the point. The point is that uh, there are things that I've decided that I want to sound like or do, and uh, and sure, they might be outweighed by all the things that I can't, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be proud of what we can do. And
Oh
that's
yeah.
what that mastery comes in. It's like mastery is anything that you can do perfectly every time. And there's lots of things that you and I can do perfectly every time
Yep.
that a fifth grader definitely couldn't. Like if I think I'm thinking of uh, fifth grade us looking at us now, behind the curtain, like the audition, freaking out that they're like incredible,
Right.
right?
That's a good way to. Yeah, I like that a lot. I don't think about my past self acknowledging my future self that much, but
Mm-hmm.
because it is different than what I. Well, is it? I don't know. It's we can't plan our future exactly. What's Mike Tyson's phrase? Everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face.
Yeah.
I mean, and there's life just throws a lot at you sometimes, and you're constantly taking one for the team. So
Yeah.
the team being all your past all your past selves.
Hmm.
So yeah, I like that a lot. I had something to add, but I don't remember what it is. But I did have a question for you. So you're also, I don't know if you still do that much, but you're also a composer of music.
Hmm.
Um, so we're talking a lot about performing, actually actively doing the activity, um, which has its own relationship to the music. But
Yeah.
what about you as a like actual, architect of that music?
Yeah. It, it's different because rarely do I get like that same nervousness in the chest of like the spiky ball sitting in your heart or whatever
Hmm.
however you want to characterize that, or the tension in the back or the fingers,
Hmm.
because there's like an urgency to the performance, right? Because it's happening now, and if you screw up, you screwed up. Like it's then and done.
Right.
But when it comes to composing, you got all the time in the world, right? Like you could you could take forever to write the piece, and in fact, a lot of times pieces do take forever, and they never see the light of
Sure.
day.
Sure. Well,
But
that was a follow up I had of like when you get to that point, because I know you have other thoughts. But when do you
mm,
know that something is done? Is it just when it's due? It's done. Like,
well, yeah, there's different there's different reasons it could be done,
right.
and certainly being due is one of them. Um, but but there's something else that keeps me from writing sometimes, and that could be characterized as anxiety, is that same question of, am I going to write something good? Are
Yep.
people going to enjoy this?
Will Marty like this? Yeah.
Right. And it's the same stuff, when you get up to solo or when you get up to perform a difficult passage. Um, it's just stretched out over a lot longer period of time, where unfortunately you get to think about it a lot longer, where you can sit there and ruminate and be like, oh my gosh, is this good? But one thing that Kenny Werner talks about is daring you to write something bad. It's just saying, I bet you can't write something bad. And like if you sat down and actually tried, I think you could, but that's not the point. The point is that there's no pressure. Like
Right.
if you went to write something bad, that means that there's no pressure for it to be good. So whatever you wanted to write would just flow out of you,
Hmm.
as opposed to you double checking every single pitch you write down and being, oh, is this good? And hemming and hawing about every little thing that you do, and then never finishing anything because you're spending so much time deciding whether or not it's good or not. And in fact, it can get to the point where composers talk about being inspired to write something like that, which doesn't always happen, but it can.
Hmm.
Being preoccupied with something being good or not can be a serious blocker to having anything come out of you.
Right.
And um, Kenny Werner goes into these meditations that he recommends, where you do mantras like "I am a master."
Oh yeah, I remember that. That's right.
Yeah, and um, he even like catches you right after like reading that first phrase. He's like, I bet you thought that's ridiculous as soon as you read that. And
I'll admit
it was like,
that's
yep,
my
you
usual
got me.
reaction. Yeah, yeah.
You got me, Kenny. Like, that's exactly what I thought. But there's a difference between the master that he's talking about and the master that you're imagining in your head. And the master you're imagining in your head is, oh man, I can't write like Wayne Shorter. I can't write like Sammy Nestico. I can't write like Schubert or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And I think what he's trying to really get at is you're the best at writing like yourself. There's nothing blocking you from writing like yourself. You're gonna write like that no matter what, right? So just let that stuff out of you without all these expectations of writing like someone. And I've certainly done that where I'm like, okay, I'm gonna write this tune as if I like in the style of Sammy Nestico
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. And that can be a fun exercise as long as you're not coming through it with like the expectation that like, well, it's going to sound like the next Sammy Nestico classic that every high school band is going to play from now until the end of time. Like
Right.
that's not going to happen. Um, so it's releasing that character that's within you that um, it's already there. You just have to let it out. Excuse me.
No, that's perfect. I mean, it's already there with I always I go back and forth on some of what he talks about. And I know I'll admit right now that I probably simply didn't understand a lot of it the first
Mm-hmm.
time, because I read this book years and years ago. So if I read it again, there's a phrase, might be a Taoist phrase or something, but it's when the student is ready, the master appears. So
Mm-hmm.
there are plenty of books that I own that I read and went, or started to read and went, this isn't doing it for me. And then years down the line, I'll pick it up again and it'll be like, whoa, the best thing ever.
Yeah.
So I bet if I read it again, it would click differently,
Certainly.
But that being said, my perception of it right now, since I haven't read it for a long time, is a lot of it is doesn't always quite do it for me. Like he talks about observing, he observes his fingers,
Yeah.
things like that. I tried, and I think I even talked to Dr. Atwell about this because he was there. He listened to his things for his French horn playing, and I think I talked to him, and I don't know if a lot of his concepts translate to every instrument.
Yeah. He talks about in one chapter kind of getting on board to this method
Mm-hmm.
where I forget the name of the teacher that he had, but the teacher basically was like, you're going to play one note on the piano and observe your finger dropping on the key
Right.
for like a week, right?
Right.
This is all he did. He didn't play anything other than like one pitch, and it was like observing his finger drop on the pitch and having it just be this natural thing that happened.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I think that's a much more difficult thing to visualize on trombone because you have this much more wide range of motion that you have to do.
A lot of it, and quite frankly, when your breathing apparatus is involved, that's why I have a hard time in meditation with observing my breath. My breathing is so attached to the activity of what I'm doing that I can't. This is me, right? I shouldn't speak for all brass players, but I have found that I can't observe what I'm doing without it becoming too relaxed, so that to the point of no structure, because you need physical structure in order to make the sound, right? You have to control what you're doing to an extent. Whereas, at least the way he describes it, you just watch your finger drop. It's like, well, literally anyone can do that. Not for a week, maybe not for more than once, but like they can simply observe their hand dropping.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, well, if I just sigh into my instrument. Like it doesn't quite it
Yeah,
doesn't quite translate one to one. You have to do some uh, assimilation of it into what you're doing.
yeah. I, so I agree on the fact that I don't I don't agree 100% with everything that he's putting forth in the book. I think some of it is probably not the way I really want to put it, but it's kind of like wooey to me, where it's like, do allow yourself to do these um, things without your ego in front of it. Um, we're the ego is part of us, like kind of to me, no matter like what you do, it exists. It's like that the wolf in the corner, like it's this thing that's there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I know he might fight that because it's like he's not trying to get it labeled in any way, like the um, the Buddhist teachings and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, at least for me, the way I'm interpreting and the way that I think it's assisting me is that instead of forcing things to happen, you're allowing things to happen on your instrument, however that may come up for you.
Right.
Um, like for him and his uh, piano teacher, it was getting yourself out of the way of like just the mechanics of dropping your finger and letting the piano play. Uh, and it's allowing like these ideas that are in your head to be unfiltered by the expectations of other people.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and that's kind of where I'm getting the most value out of it. And I'm not a practiced enough meditator to like truly be the in the back seat of the car watching,
Right.
whatever, like watching me play the saxophone. Um, I don't know if that's just, I'm not haven't practiced this for very long, or it's just not something that I connect with very much. Yeah, I'm sure everyone's going to get something different out of it.
Yeah. And it could be that, when folks talk about these types of things, these more esoteric experiences, let's call them, like,
Mm-hmm.
um, we don't know exactly what they're describing, you know, like the
Yeah,
sensation of what they're describing. We don't know. We can't know. They have their
yeah,
experience. So it's like that theory of like, if I hold up something blue, it's like, I see blue, you see blue, but if we switched bodies, would they be the same color? You know what I mean? Like,
exactly.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's impossible to compare our first person subjective experience.
Right. Exactly. It is. Um, which is kind of cool because we are our own little universes, but also like difficult because it makes it really hard to communicate with each other and help each other in this way sometimes.
Yeah, I think the biggest uh, or easiest way to illustrate this is I was reading about people with there's a special word for this, but they have no mind's eye,
Sure.
meaning they can't visualize like objects in
Right.
their mind. They have no like, and as a result of this, they have a difficult time with spatial reasoning.
Right.
So we learn more and more over the last, you know, I want to say like 30, 40 years since psychology has been like more and more looked at
Mm-hmm.
with a finer comb. Certainly one of the frontiers in science right now.
Neuroscience is one of my favorite topics ever.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Uh, it's if there can be people with these experiences that I mean, like I have, to me, a very sharp mind's eye where I can like visualize things and they seem quite real to me, almost as if I can like touch them.
Mm-hmm.
if there's things like that where these are things that people just don't even talk about, like I bet you someone that doesn't have a mind's eye, unless they heard someone else talk about it, like them visualizing something in their minds, they'd have no idea that they were missing something. You
Right.
know,
Yeah.
like there's no reason for them to know that, like, oh, I can't visualize a square in my brain. You know, unless someone else brings up that they can, they have no way of knowing. So how many other things are sitting in the dark,
Hmm.
like that we just don't talk about, that like we experience every day, but there's some people that don't, or there's some people that experience it more sharply.
Right.
uh,
I
so
know
it's
what a big
crazy.
thing, synesthesia is like something that people experience where they can see sound and things like that.
Yeah,
It's like I don't know what it's labeled as. I don't think it's like a disorder or anything, but it's
right.
it's just an extra sensory experience.
hmm
So
I was blown away when I saw something like 6 to 10% of the population does not get any emotional reaction to music.
hmm,
And I can't I can't imagine. This is my nerdum showing, but like I can't, and some recent events, but I can't imagine not feeling emotional hearing the Lord of the Rings theme,
absolutely, yeah. What
right?
gets me every time is the tune called "Test Flight" from How to Train Your Dragon.
Oh yeah, that tune
It's that like
makes
famous,
me
the one
tear
everyone
up
knows.
every time.
It gets me. I can't. I just
Yeah, but then there's people that just like it doesn't even register
right.
on their emotional scale at all. They're
Yeah.
like, well, it was just noise going on in the background, and you're like, dude, what? I can't even understand you right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how many other things are there like that that
Hmm.
we
Well,
don't even talk about?
it's interesting that brings to mind something slightly different, but in the vein of what you're talking about is so I teach high schoolers and some middle schoolers. I teach younger kids, new musicians, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and I resist being like a kids these days kind of guy.
Sure.
Because they have a completely different experience than what we did and what our parents did. Like they're
Yeah.
no better or worse than anyone. They're just having an experience that we don't quite understand. That's simply it. So I refuse to get pissy about how they are. Uh, but at the same time, I'm a little concerned because a lot of what I do is marching band,
Mm-hmm.
which you need a lot of coordination of timing for. So young people, the ones I've interacted with, are having a really hard time uh, understanding a sense of pulse and tempo in music. Like, and I get it, trying to play your instrument and do the marching stuff, like that's a lot of coordination for your body to handle. So I get that that's difficult and some people have a hard time with it. But literally stepping in time is very hard for them.
Hmm.
Um, and they have no trouble walking, things like it's nothing like physically wrong with them. Um, a lot of kids and like percussionists in particular, because I teach brass and percussion at this one school. Um, some percussionists in particular are having a hard time being able to find like a pulse in a piece of music. And
Interesting.
right, and that's concerning, isn't it? Because like that's the
Yeah.
basis of everything, is to be able to find the groove of what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
Um, and I've come to realize that some of it is like a cultural, societal thing. At least in the U.S., I can't speak to other countries about this, but um, music for younger people tends to be just a thing that exists. It's not a focal point like I feel like it
Hmm.
was in my childhood, right? Like, and my parents are not. My mom played music through high school, but like they're not musicians. Um, but they did, they played music for us in the car. They shows like Sesame Street and like Barn, like a lot of the kids shows were
Yeah.
they were less overall stimulating, but music was more like
More present.
more present. Yeah, because there's music in kids shows now. Of course there
Yeah.
is. There's tons of it. Um, but those shows are also just completely overstimulating, in my opinion.
Yeah.
In every other regard, like everything's just too animated. The colors are too much. Like there's just too much going on. So when they sing a song, it's just like, and now a song, and now this, and
Yeah.
Uh, so it's very. I just feel like it's not part of them to feel music. Music is a consumer product to a lot of people. And I'm not saying
Sure.
everyone should be musicians either. That's not what I'm saying. It's just to experience music, you need to be able to internalize it a little bit.
Right.
So that has nothing really to do with the percentage of people you're talking about, because that's like an actual like chemical thing going on in their head.
Right. Right. It's
But
like a brain structure thing.
exactly
Yeah.
right. And so I'm not bashing on that at all. That's just they can't control that. That's fine.
Yeah.
But I will admit that I'm a little worried for a lot of future generations if music is to be simply not even a commodity, because it's always been a commodity, but like not put in the right frame of mind for people. Like it's just
Sure.
on. You just have music on, or it's
What do you think
in the game
of?
I'm playing or whatever.
And of course, this is also kind of a thing I try and stay away from is like kind of all them kids, those young kids doing silly things.
Hmm.
But
That was us too. So
yeah. But what do you think of this? So much of our social media um, is like we see the prevalence of the short form video
mhm.
being like the thing, and I totally get sucked into that. My attention is like
It's
easily,
designed for it. We are
yeah,
not smarter than an entire marketing team whose specialty is getting our attention. Like,
100%.
yeah.
I get sucked into that so easily. But there's a lot of the times music going on in the back of these, 10-second to 30-second videos. Are they just not getting enough long form exposure to something to like get a sense of pulse and rhythm? Because they're like, well, let's move on to the next thing. We haven't been able to digest what this music is all about
Hmm.
in the last 10 seconds. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I don't, I'm throwing garbage out there and
Right.
seeing if it sticks on anything. I'm not like a psychologist or anything, but
Well, no,
uh,
I mean, I think the science is out that if you don't sit in an atmosphere long enough, you can't acclimate to it.
right. Like even the shortest music that tends to be out there for like consumption is the radio single, right? And the radio single is like 2.5 to 3 minutes,
Hmm.
um, maybe a little longer if you want to push your luck. But in comparison to a 30-second video,
Right.
like that's enormous, right?
Hmm.
So, I'm not quite sure what the impact of that is, and I think we're going to find that out more and more in the next 10 years or so if we don't change the way we're consuming media. If
Absolutely.
we don't change the way we're consuming media, um, there's going to be something going on because I know it's been my experience that I have a harder time sitting down and reading a book because I will space out and be like, oh, I'm not being stimulated, you know,
Yeah.
boom, boom, boom. So suddenly I'm disinterested in these things that are a lot more long form satisfaction, like reading a book.
Hmm.
I just find that my attention is getting worse and worse. On top of me already feeling like I didn't have the best attention to start with, makes it kind of frustrating.
Absolutely. And it no one's just the way our society is right now. I'm not going to label it good or bad. I have my opinion on it, but it just is. Right? So
Sure.
um, no one's going to help you become like get your attention span. No one's going to like coach you, and there's advice out there. You can go on YouTube and get advice for all that, but that's like also perpetuating the problem as at the same time. It's
Yeah.
and I'm a YouTube junkie. I will look for any and all information, and because my method of that's actually um, part of what I talked to Kirk about in audition preparation was my lesson essentially is
Hmm.
managing my nerves and audition preparation in that whole sphere. Uh, and I admitted to him, because I know this as a fact, my method of procrastination is research. Right? Like,
Ooh,
right?
it feels like you're doing something productive, but
Yep.
you're skipping out on what you really value.
Yeah. I saw an interview with a man named Toby Oft. He's the principal trombone player of the Boston Symphony. And uh, is really, he has some great interviews and articles that he wrote about his audition preparation and process and getting students ready and all that kind of stuff. And he shared his process for winning the Boston audition and several auditions before that he won and lost. Uh, but he summed this up really nicely. He's like, all right, so essentially there are two types of people. There are knowers and there are doers. And the ones who achieve anything are usually the doers, even if they
Yeah.
don't know as much as the knowers. So there was a to expound upon that. There's a I don't know if it's a parable, but it's a story. I believe it was an actual experiment where they took a photography class. Have you heard about this one?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're I forget which university or anything like that, but the story at least is that they took this photography class, they split it in half. Half the photographers, their assignment was you must study photography, like study the art of photography, read all the material, and get all the master classes in. And you take one photo for your final. You
Yep.
turn in, or you get one photo shoot, and you turn in one photo. Maybe that was it, but
Yeah.
so you must study, you must know the theory, you must know everything, be a knower, and then turn in your thing. And the other half was go take photos, pick one,
Yeah.
turn it in at the end. uh, and you might guess the answer of whose photos tended to be more aesthetically pleasing was
Hmm.
the doers, because they got the experience of really getting their hands dirty with what works and what doesn't, rather than secondhand knowledge of what works and what doesn't and what theoretically works. Theories are always great.
Yeah.
you know, too many people, I mean, you're in the jazz world, and that is full of nerds who think they know what they're talking about. And there are
Oh my
people that
gosh.
can you can speak to this better, and I ask you to, but I'll say my piece of
Yeah.
you mentioned it before. There's people with their noses upturned in the jazz world, um, and I've noticed there's a lot of gatekeepers in jazz who, well, if you don't know jazz, or if you don't know bebop or a certain style, or if you don't know enough of a certain music theory, uh,
Yeah.
whatever it is, then well, you're not really into it if you don't know this,
Yeah.
and that's
I
in and
got
that's in several spheres. You see this in writing, in
yeah.
movies, all that kind of stuff.
I got a an emotional beatdown from a guest artist in grad school where I picked him up from the airport, and I
Okay.
won't say his name, but I picked him up from the airport, and it was like an hour-long drive.
Okay.
And basically, most of the way back, it was him railing me on jazz history.
Was he like testing you? Like, how did that come about? Like,
Um, yeah, he was. I'm not quite sure exactly how we got onto the conversation that we were on,
mhm.
but at some point he was just like, what's the earliest alto saxophonist that you know, like historically? And he's like, and before I could even say anything, he's like, please don't say it's Johnny Hodges.
Adolf Sachs in your face.
You know, and you know, at the time I couldn't really say,
Right.
you know, and to be honest, you know, to this day, you know, history in general is something I struggle with, but because it's a memorization thing, and it takes a little bit more for me.
At least the academic version of history is mostly memorization.
Correct,
sure. Yeah.
Correct. But you know, by the end of that drive, I more or less got the vibe from him that I shouldn't be doing jazz school like at all if I wasn't dedicated to learning all this stuff that he decided was important to know. And some of that stuff, you know, it might be true that a person that is really into knowing the history of jazz would know. But what was I in school for? You know, it's like hey man, like I know you're expecting me to like know all this stuff already, but like, aren't you the teacher? Isn't that what I'm like kind of paying to help me along the way with here? So it's a weird situation to put yourself in. I kind of, on one hand, I kind of understand like, you know, they want the representatives of jazz to be as high quality as possible because jazz is I don't know if I'd call it a waning style, but it's definitely not, it's not pop, you know.
Right. It's kind of an endangered species in our culture.
Right. It's weird. It ebbs and flows.
Sure.
I think saying that it's going extinct is going too far.
Well, and that's, you know, and I'll piggyback on that just for a second because we're on this topic.
Yeah.
It's usually the elitists who think it's in trouble because they're the fixed mind people of this industry.
Right.
It's like jazz is freaking everywhere if you look for it.
Yeah.
And if you broaden your definition of what jazz is, you know.
Right.
It's everywhere.
I'm sure I'll probably get some form of hate for this, but
good. You know, that means you have an opinion that's worth saying.
There's let me know if you know this artist. Have you heard of Lauve?
Yeah, she's great. I like her a lot.
She's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a wonderful Adam Neely video out there. I highly recommend you go check it out.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically just called "Is Lauve Jazz?"
I've seen the thumbnail for it because I follow him.
Yeah,
so
fantastic video.
Yeah.
I think, you know, the TLDR is that no, but we're happy she's out there. There's a song that she put out called "From the Start," which I believe kind of rocketed her up to, you know, fame.
Sure.
And in the middle of it, there's a little scat solo. And in the scat solo, there's a moment that there's a blatant Charlie Parker lick, just like right there. And
so she sings this Charlie Parker lick.
She sings the Charlie Parker lick.
Okay.
If you guys don't know anything about her, she's I believe a Berkeley cellist.
Okay.
Or was it? I want to get that right.
I believe you're right as well, but we can check. Yeah.
But you know, she found herself singing more often than playing her cello, and she fell in love with Chet Baker, his singing, because when he had that mouth injury, he started singing a bunch more,
mm-hmm.
and had fantastic scat solos. So she fell in love with his kind of way of scat singing, and I assume that's where she absorbed that sort of bebop language, because Chet Baker was all over the bebop language.
Sure.
But what blew me away is there's a short clip of her scat singing that solo for a large audience of, I would assume to be around 20-year-olds. Um, and they all sing it along with her. So there's like
I love that. I love it.
hundreds of like 20-year-old, you know, adults or children, whatever you want to call them
Hmm.
nowadays. Scat like there's the Charlie Parker is in the modern uh like
Vernacular. Yeah.
yeah like consciousness.
Sure.
It's
Yeah.
just kind of like it exists there, and like maybe they don't know it, right? Most of them probably don't even know what they're doing, but the fact that it exists there is like amazing to me. And if that is a gateway drug for some people to be like, oh, I heard Lauve talk about she really likes Chet Baker, I'm going to listen to some Chet Baker, and suddenly they're listening to Ella Fitzgerald and
Hmm.
Miles Davis and all this sort of stuff, that's awesome. um, and the fact that some people are kind of putting Lauve down as like, well, she's not really jazz, like, well, she's Lauve, she's doing her thing, and any attention at all to this older form of music is fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, the only constant in this life is change. And we need to recognize that we're supposed to, what is it? What's the word? There's a phrase that I really like. It's something along the lines of tradition is tending a fire, or no, tradition is passing a torch, not tending ashes, or something like that. Like,
Oh,
or
okay.
worshiping ashes, or whatever it is. It's yeah, it's like passing the torch rather than conserving ashes. I think that's what it is.
Okay.
Something along those lines. You kind of get what I'm talking about.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, and I'm sure I could look that up in 10 seconds if I wanted, but here we are. Um, I really liked that because, yeah, like this art form, all of music is like that. It's not supposed to be people, we think of Mozart as this hoity-toity stuff, but he was like literally he's like an equivalent to Michael Jackson of that time. Like
Mhm.
took the art form and just blew it up. Absolutely expanded it to its popping seams. And
Yeah.
people went, "Oh, that's too much. It's too many notes," as they say. um, or it's like, well, that's not that's not Haydn. How dare you? That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like, and when people heard Haydn, they're like, well, that's not Telemann. How dare you? Like it just keeps going
It's
back like
just a
that.
cycle. Yeah.
There is, I think we talked about this once. There's a clip I saw, maybe on TikTok or YouTube or something, where people are reading clips starting in the present about the older generation complaining about the younger one, and it
Yeah.
literally goes back to ancient Egypt. Like they find a quote
Oh my gosh.
about one
Oh
generation
yeah.
complaining
Yeah.
about the last.
And it's like more or less the same talking points,
Yeah,
just
kids these days are
about different
soft. Yeah,
points.
like
Yeah, yeah. Or it's either they're soft or their music is too crazy, or like, like those rock and rollers and there's like thrusting pelvises and stuff.
right.
Like, it's just yeah.
No, that's exactly right, and it's so funny. So what we're seeing a lot of the time is like the old curmudgeons just time passes you by. If you don't change, then you are a point in history. You're not current. And that's
Hmm.
neither good or bad. You know, you don't have to change, but you have to
Yeah.
understand that, oh, I study a historical type of this.
Hmm.
The current type comes from what I do, but it's not what I do. And that's okay. I think more
Right.
people need to add those three words to the end of their shit. And that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. That kind of brings me back to talking about how this book relates to practice,
Sure. Yes, please do.
because we're like, I could have listened to this guest from the, from the airport,
Hmm.
right? And been like, okay, either I need to quit or I need to like dive into all these history books and get all this stuff done. And then you know, a part of learning all that history is making sure that you've practiced all kind of the root styles of jazz,
Hmm.
whether that be second line sort of music and early swing and stuff like that. Um, and the pigeonhole that we get into is that unless we sound exactly like Louis Armstrong or exactly like Johnny Hodges or Sidney Bechet or something like that, then like we're not worth anything. Um, while in reality, we we can more or less pick and choose how we want to sound, and whether that be an amalgamation of all these like players that you love
Hmm.
or something new that you're trying to, innovate. Um, that I think that just affects the way that you practice. If you decide that like you're no good unless you sound exactly like one person or another person, that's like a huge hamper on practicing. So much to the point that I know for like a couple weeks after I met that guy and had that conversation, I had a really hard time motivating myself to practice.
Yep, I have a similar story in the past. Like, I actually took the second half of May off. I took 2 weeks to just not play. I couldn't bring myself to do it because I
Yeah,
was taking these auditions in the earlier half of the month, and I was supposed to take more, but I canceled them because it was so like I felt like a fish trying to climb a tree.
yeah,
you know, it
yeah.
was so like antithesis to what I do naturally on my instrument.
Hmm.
So it turns out I'm probably just not a like a high level like a uh, I'm not a professional orchestral trombonist. I play in orchestras, but I'm not an orchestral trombonist. Like
Sure.
so, and I play in jazz ensembles. I'm not a jazz trombonist necessarily. So I'm just a
Yeah.
trombonist.
I, I even really hesitate to like decide what I am and what I'm not. Um, but I really struggled with this last year. Last year, I had really hard time practicing, and it's to the point where maybe I was practicing like once a week
Hmm.
or something like that for half an hour, something like that.
Yeah.
And it was more or less riding on the coattails of I was playing a lot of gigs, so at least that was like keeping the horn in my mouth,
Right. You had your
right?
chops at least. Yeah.
Right. But then there's no growth or there's no change or
Yeah.
anything like that.
Well, and that's,
Um,
I've not to cut you off, I'm sorry, but
no, go ahead.
I think that brings up an interesting point that you and I are not stating out loud, but we kind of come to the realization, whether you know it or not, you come to this realization of, well, I could not practice and nothing happens. Like, you know,
Yeah,
like if you feel like if you don't practice enough, you stop, like people notice to the point where they don't want you anymore, like that kind of a thing.
yeah,
But in my experience, like that's never happened. Like if I just don't practice as much, or for a while, like nothing, no one seems to care. And that is cool in one way because it takes some pressure off, but also you kind of do need that external pressure to, you
to
know,
grow. Yeah,
to
yeah,
grow and be a musician and join other musicians.
yeah. Part of the reason that I struggled practicing is when I moved up to Appleton, I lost a lot of gigs that I normally had in Milwaukee, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So I was just like, I was kind of in a gig drought. I had nothing to like practice for.
Right. Yeah.
And you're like, well, that's a nice motivator to be like, oh, well, next week I got to play, 3 solos. I got to know these changes. I got to know the saxophone soli. Some of the stuff I can sight read, but not all of it. I got to prepare all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there's like it's like a nervous pressure, right? You're
Sure.
like, oh my gosh, I can't look bad on stage. I can't, like, I've got to practice for this. And that's like, to me, that's a low hanging fruit for motivation when it comes to practicing. And as soon as all that was gone, like, not all of it, I was still playing, but like a lot of it was gone when I moved. I discovered that, like, the reason I liked to play saxophone had almost, like, over a few years, had almost entirely been supplanted by the need to not suck in front of people.
Right.
You know what I
Right.
mean?
And it was
So
that's clearly ego driven, and you're not a bad person for that. Like that's fine.
right,
Like
it's just I think I don't think it's a bad thing.
no.
I just wanted it to be more joyful, if that makes any sense at all.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's part of the reason I started reading this book, because I was reading, or I was hearing from people that, hey, like, it's an interesting book to try and think about removing those sort of expectations from yourself. And um, another interesting resource that I found was the You'll Hear It podcast. Have you heard of this?
I don't know that one. You'll hear it.
So there's this wonderful online resource called Open Studio. It's a bunch of jazz musicians from around the New York area.
Mm-hmm.
It's Adam Manis and Peter Martin as pianists on it, and it's kind of piano focused, but they're broad enough to you know um, cater to a wide audience, but they're
Sure.
very aimed at jazz. Um,
Well,
and they put out one episode that was about living a musical life. And this is one thing that I got stuck on really bad in grad school. I more or less heard from people, and from this interview with Joe Lovano, if you know, is a wonderful tenor player.
yeah, I've heard his name. I think I know. I need to see the face, but I do know who he is. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Yeah. So Joe Lovano, there's this interview with him, and he's like, unless you're like obsessed with playing your instrument and listening and all this stuff, and like, unless that's your life and you're consuming music like because you want to and you love to, you should. If you don't want to do those things, you just don't get into music. He was basically saying, it's not worth it for you to get into music unless, like, that's you eat, sleep, and breathe music. Like, that's everything to you. And at the time, I was like, that's bullshit. it, it,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, yes. I'm talking like I understand because I have tried to make music my full-time profession.
Yeah.
And it's almost impossible to be a full-time performer if that's what he's talking about. To perform music full-time. That is a lifestyle that is a lot has to go into it. A lot of resources go into that a lot
Yeah.
of people don't even start with, like
Yeah.
you need money to be a musician. Like what is it? How do you need to make $1 million is start with $2 million. Like
Yeah. Exactly.
a lot of that kind of stuff goes into music, being a professional performer. But also that kind of negates. I'm curious to your thoughts on this, but what that phrase, what his opinion on this is, that
Mhm.
negates the whole concept of music as an enjoyable hobby. It seems it's like if you're not going to go
Yeah.
full in, don't touch it at all. It's like, well, then where are the people who love music that are musicians but just want to play, like just want to be as good as they are and enjoy it? Like, where does that leave room for that?
Yeah. I think it was maybe a little more nuanced than that. And he was
Okay,
saying
I would
that if
assume. He
you,
seems like a pretty nice dude, you know.
yeah, I think he was trying to say that like don't try to make it your full-time profession unless like that's all you can
Right.
think about,
If it's
right?
that or suicide, then yeah, do that. But
Right, right, do that. Well, that seems like an easy choice,
right,
but
right.
um, but the way that like my mind works, I have like I get focused on like lots of little random things all the time, and I couldn't find myself like focusing on music that hard for that length of time. So I felt like, well, it's done for me. I can't like just the way that like I kind of structure my interests in my life. I'm excluded from this club.
Hmm.
Um, but I, what was keeping me from like living the music and kind of letting me enjoy it on a day-to-day basis was the ego saying like, as soon as I listen to Joe Lovano or I listen to like um, Joshua Redman or like some modern, player that's incredible, I, I feel like the jealousy coming in. I feel the um, the expectations on myself being like, oh my gosh, like I'll never sound like this person, and that was stealing the enjoyment from me.
Hmm.
And as soon as I was thinking about that more and more and realizing that that was what was coming up for me, my enjoyment like skyrocketed. And at the beginning of this year, and I don't like New Year's resolutions, but for whatever reason, the timing just sort of happened
Yeah.
right where like at the top of the year, I um, had like a practice reawakening, I guess, where it was just like I was practicing for maybe 2 hours a day, almost every day for several months. And it was like so much of that stuff can just hold you back from practicing because you think you're never going to be like this person or be as good as this or that or sound like this or that. It doesn't really matter. It comes from like, we talk about observing like a thought or a sensation or something like that and appreciating that for what it is.
Hmm.
Same thing with the music, where I got in my own way from like listening to new players. Well, I guess he's not really newish. I was going to say Seamus Blake or something like that. I mean, so there's plenty of examples of modern players, probably even people that are younger than you and I, that are like, oh my God, these people are incredible.
Oh yeah, I see that all the
Uh,
time.
yeah. Um, and for some people, that discourages them from practicing. And then for other people, it's like, oh man, I want to learn that thing that they just did, on this solo or this way that they do their vibrato or whatever it might be. So that's kind of where I'm at right now when it comes to practice is instead of like all the comparison, it's being interested, just being like, oh my gosh, this solo is incredible. What happened right there? Like that's where the love and the joy comes from is like just deciding to put away the comparison and to just be interested. And it has made me listen to so much more music than I ever have before. And it's had me practice more than I ever have before. And still sometimes that feeling sneaks in where you're just like, oh, I'll never be as good as this person. Like, I'll never be playing, you know, at Birdland or something
Hmm.
in New York. And it's like, honestly, I don't know if I'd want to, but the, but, we're playing for wonderful audiences around here in Wisconsin.
the Fox Valley, like where the area you live in, eats it with a spoon. They love it so much. It's
They
great.
do.
It's so great. I've never felt a more appreciative audience than when I was living up there in that area. Like
Hmm.
it's so fun. My greatest compliment I ever got was when I was playing in a bar. Do you remember that? I don't. Uh,
I don't know.
so I don't think you were part of it, but it was with there's a group called the Jazz Orgy that
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Uh,
that they have a
Indeed.
rotating. It's usually like the piano, bass, and drums are usually the same folks,
Yep.
and they'll rotate. Whoever's with them. Um, they would play at this bar every Sunday when we were in college, and my several friends and I would just go grab a $2 really crappy beer and listen to Lizard Lager. I don't know if you ever had that one at Peabody's, but it was bad. It was bad,
Oh,
but it was cheap.
gross. The
But
mantra of any college student.
yeah,
It was bad, but it was cheap.
but it was cheap. Fit the budget. Yeah, but they'd get to know who were the musicians around and the music students, and they were very gracious and awesome. And
Yeah.
I even took Tai Chi lessons from the bass player, which taught me a lot. Again, body awareness stuff.
Andy Mertens?
Yeah, he teaches Tai Chi.
He teaches Tai Chi?
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah. He has a center. He has a school in Oshkosh for it.
That's awesome. I'll have to ask him about it next time I
Yes.
see him.
I actually live a couple blocks from the school where he learned Tai Chi.
Wow.
Or no, his teacher teaches at this. It's his teacher's school. I don't know if Andy came here to study, but the
Okay.
teacher that Andy learned from is like a couple blocks. His studio is a couple blocks from here. So I should get back into Tai
Man,
Chi.
now suddenly I can imagine it with the long hair and he's just
Oh, yeah.
like, oh my God.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He's all for it. But yeah, they're super great folks, and they're very into like supporting any musician they come across. And
Yeah.
so they would see you, and they'd always ask, "Oh, you bring your horn?" And we would once in a while, just on the off
Yeah.
chance they wanted us to play a little bit. And I did. And I'm not a great improviser. Like I don't know the music theory, and I get lost in the form quite often. Like I know my pitfalls when I play jazz.
Mhm.
But I'm a decent trombone player who can pull out some of the hat tricks, like technically.
Yeah.
So I might not be good, but I'm entertaining. And that's a whole nother discussion we could have about this industry we're in.
Yeah, definitely.
But again, the joy was there. I was having a good time with supportive people who didn't care how good or bad I sounded. In a bar, in a little towny bar full of drunks, like whatever. It's great.
Yeah.
It's overall a good time. This old man would come up afterwards, and the greatest compliment I ever received as a trombonist was, "I didn't know the trombone could do that." Like,
Oh my
and that,
gosh.
if you hear that, like that's a good sign.
This is a good sign.
So I got to
Yeah.
represent my instrument well. That was nice. But yeah, and it really is like the joy of it is really what matters, because like whether you play or not, literally everything else in life keeps going. Like it's just one of
Yeah.
those things. I could put the trombone in the case and leave it there for the rest of my life and phone up all the people I gig with, and they'll go, "Ah, shit. Okay." And they'll call the next person on the list. Like it,
Yep.
and that's not like to say that they're waiting for me to do that. It's just the reality of it.
Right.
So you simply must do it for the joy of it.
Yeah.
Because in the best way possible, no one else cares, really.
Yeah.
So
I definitely feel that way about composing more than my playing,
sure.
because that for me has rarely made me any money. And if I stopped, if I never wrote anything ever again, I don't think anyone would notice. But it's so that sometimes you feel like you need to
Hmm.
like write something down
Yeah,
with something spinning around in your
you're
head.
a. I mean, you're a storyteller. Like Mitch is our. There's a group of us from Oshkosh that play Dungeons and Dragons together. All of us are musicians. I mean, your brother's not, but he's like part of the clan. It's fine. Uh,
Yeah. He played trumpet for like 3 weeks in fifth grade.
that counts. Okay. um, and Mitch is our game master, our dungeon master. So he's like the story. You're a storyteller. Like that is kind of just who you are, right? You enjoy it. You have
Yeah.
this idea, and you want to see where it leads, because Dungeons and Dragons is very much like jazz, where you have this general sense of what you want to happen, and then you just bullshit your way and just see what epicness comes out of it, or hilarity,
Yeah.
one of the two. Sometimes tragedy.
As soon as I picked up Dungeons and Dragons, I realized that how just exactly like jazz it was,
Hmm.
with kind of just like, here's our general structure, go. Just
Yeah,
like do whatever.
right. Here's some
And
stuff that some people wrote that you can play in. You can play in their sandbox,
exactly,
right? Which is what all these tunes are that all the greats wrote.
exactly. And since we're all playing the same game, that's how you know that's how we make it work, right?
Hmm.
We're not all each in our individual imaginary places. We're coming together and writing this story together, which
Right.
is exactly how a small group jazz
Yeah.
works.
And I would argue how you work as a composer. You have this, you get a germ of an idea. You've kind of talked to me about your process a tiny, tiny bit. And it might have changed since you said that to me years ago. But you get this like earworm kind of germ in your head.
Yeah,
And then you have to see where it goes. You just have to see what happens to it.
yeah, and you really want it to be a place of discovery.
Hmm.
I have written on commission before, and it's such a different experience.
Oh yeah, I'll tell you, I'm an arranger, so I don't get to choose. I just get to,
Hmm.
here's the song, make it for strings, and there's a lot of creativity in that. I enjoy it. I
Yeah.
enjoy because I'm a much better I'm a better editor than I am a writer.
Mhm.
So I enjoy the tweaking portion of it.
Yeah.
So arranging is really a good thing for me. But composing, that's like you said, it's you have to see where it goes.
Yeah. Arranging just has so much latitude, though. I think every time I think of like an arranger, some people are like, well, you're just kind of like redoing some stuff that somebody has already done. But then I listen to uh, the John Clayton arrangement of Stars and Stripes Forever,
Hmm.
that's sung by Whitney Houston at the Super Bowl. I forget which Super Bowl, but there's
Wait,
an arrangement of the
is
John,
it the Stars and Stripes or the national anthem?
or sorry, National Anthem.
Okay, okay.
My bad. Yeah, National Anthem. Uh, National Anthem, arranged by John Clayton, which, if you don't know, a long time big band arranger. And I know he did orchestral stuff, but I didn't know this until I heard this version that he did um, the national anthem
Hmm.
with Whitney Houston, and the character of that tune is like totally transformed in in a bunch of sections,
Hmm.
and like it's the same tune. I don't think Whitney Houston's doing anything like uh, crazy different with the melody.
Right.
It's just like all the chords and stuff behind it are so like there's parts that are just like ethereal and uh, gorgeous. Like it's not like a typical march like they do for the Super Bowls all the
Right.
time.
Right.
And I know it's widely lauded as a like the best national or the best national anthem that's ever been sung at a sporting event.
Hmm.
Um, so like arranging is at least as creative as like coming up with the tune, you know, all by itself. I think
Mm-hmm.
because you can take um, the simplest tunes and turn them into like masterpieces, like the Swanee River. You know that there's a big band arrangement of the Swanee River, and it's like this folk tune, right?
Yeah.
But then they transform it into this swinging hip, you know, jazz band tune. So there's just so much opportunity for creativity and arranging that I really love, and I haven't really done like a ton of specific arranging where it's not an original tune
Right.
until like last year. Um, but it's so much fun, so much fun.
I agree. Yeah. And again, I really only do it on commission right now. So it's very much just, it feels like a school assignment, you know? Um, but I actually did fall in love with it from a school assignment. It was,
Hmm.
oh, who was it? Dr. D's, um, who was an interim orchestration professor at Oshkosh.
Oh yeah, I think I remember him.
Yeah. Yeah. He was like 1 year position, just very fleeting. Cool guy
Hmm.
though. And our orchestration project it was an orchestra, it was the final. So it was the orchestra, and you got to pick between two pieces, and I picked one. It was a Scott Joplin tune. And it was just it was like 16 bars or something, nothing crazy,
Yeah,
but for a full orchestra, And yeah, you get to you're given a piano score and you say, okay, make this for orchestra and whatever version you want. So I was, toying with, like, I had the different sections of the orchestra play different things. So like the strings or like the brass started, but they all had the mutes in to like change the color of
yeah,
the introduction, because it kind of had this chromatic da 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 dee type of introduction to it.
yeah.
And I actually slowed it down so it became this more like kind of sentimental sound, because Scott Joplin stuff is usually a little more uh, quick. It's usually faster
Right.
stuff. So, but you slow down a cakewalk and it becomes a ragtime. And
That
I added some like trombone glisses in harmonies, which is always a cool sound. Like,
is a sweet sound.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and actually, people voted at the end of like, oh, which one did you like the best? And I think mine was one of the better ones that people liked.
Nice.
Because one, I had a ton of fun with it. And two, I have a privileged position as a trombone player in the orchestra, because um, I sit around a lot and just get to listen to everybody,
Oh
you
yeah.
know? And I've never been one. Some people really, really hate the fact that they have to sit and count rests and do all that stuff. Some people just check out and go, oh, this is BS. I don't
Hmm.
want to be doing this. I want to play, you know? And I find it as a great opportunity to listen, because they're playing, some of the greatest music of the greatest minds of Western Europe, like
Yeah.
if it's the traditional stuff, the Brahms and Beethoven and all them. Um, and I'm like, okay, well, how did Liszt, you know, orchestrate his stuff? How, like, oh, I noticed he gave the solo to the clarinet, or the combination of sound between a bassoon and a French horn when they play something together makes a new sound. And it's this cool,
Yeah.
awesome thing. So yeah, just like you're in a sandbox and you just get to like make castles and try different stuff.
That's
Oh,
so much more important than score study. I think
yeah.
um, it's that first. It's the listening first, and then like hearing something and being like, I love that sound.
Hmm.
And then thinking, okay, how did they do that? If you can't figure it out by ear, then go ahead and look at the score. But
Yeah.
like, it's like that's how you inform what your voice is
Yeah.
musically.
And really, I'm no expert. So like music theory, like the mathematics of it all, is not a strength of mine. It's the last thing I tend to go to. I know more than I
Hmm.
think I do, which is kind of funny, because when I'm teaching or when I'm explaining something to somebody,
Hmm.
I'll actually start using some of the chord names and things like that. And
Yeah.
so I surprise myself with how much I actually know, because I never consider myself like a music theory person, you know. It's kind
Sure.
of there's two types of thinkers with that stuff. You know, there's the people who think of the theory, the written down stuff more, and there's the people
Hmm.
who have the auditory sense. I was more of an oral skills natural. Like
Sure.
I can hear pitches and sing them back and write them down and do all that. But ask me what, you know, I can tell you what a chord inversion is if they're playing certain notes on top or that. I have good ears for that. But if you ask
Yeah.
me to like, you know, write out a certain progression or identify a progression, it's not always
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, that's like half my practice, I want to say, is like taking things orally and then converting it to the theory so you
Sure.
know what's going on.
So is that does that mean you transcribe or do you just kind of figure it out? Because those are
I
I view those as
transcribe.
different things. Like
Yeah. So I think figuring it out and like let's say I could listen to it and say, well, this is a blues, except for they change like this chord a little bit or something like
mhm,
that. I think that is useful, but you're missing if you want that idea to come out in your playing, you've got to play it. You've got to translate it to your fingers,
mhm,
or to your face, or whatever you might need to do on your instrument. Um, because otherwise you're not making a connection between what's going to actually make the sound and what you hear. Um, because I think to me the ultimate goal is if I hear something in my mind to be able to play it, you know, right away.
mhm.
Um, and I feel like the mind is like an echo chamber of all the music that you've ever heard or all the sounds that you've ever heard.
Mhm.
And some things might shoot out at certain times. Alexa, stop. Sorry for the interruption.
No, it's okay. I agree with that. I have so you talk about the joy you have found in practicing and um really just nerding out about what you're hearing and what you want to accomplish or what you want to
Hmm.
produce, you know. You have kind of refound your mojo with that.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I have as well. I kind of went through a similar process where, you know, I was preparing to take orchestra auditions. Um, it's funny, no matter the genre, the process is very much similar,
Yeah.
where you have to be a certain way and put in a certain amount of time, get out a certain amount of knowledge, and do all this. Uh,
Yeah.
and I burnt out real hard on that stuff. I burnt out real hard. I still love
Yeah.
playing in symphonies, but I can't identify so hard with being a symphonic trombonist so much, you know. Um, so I actually kind of refound my mojo. Like I like to practice again. I didn't for the longest time. Like I would avoid
Hmm.
it, and I would a little bit, and then just like lose all motivation and be like, "Why am I even doing this?" Like,
Yeah.
um, so kind of like yourself. And I refound my mojo when with teaching. Like I'm a natural born teacher. Like I was gonna be a music teacher when I went to school. I started my undergraduate as a music education major, um,
Hmm.
but I don't see myself being one solely for the fact what holds me back from just being a teacher, which I know I'd be stellar at. What holds me back is that school administrations across the country kind
Oh,
of suck. Like,
yeah.
I don't want to. That's something I learned in college was the intro to music education course. Um, I don't blame the professor for this whatsoever. But that course really turned me off because most of the course was you're going to have to defend your job the most time. Like most of your time is going to be spent defending your job. And I'm like, well, that
Yeah.
I don't want to. I want to help the kids. I want to wave the stick. Like I, you know, like
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to be sitting there like expecting the blade to decapitate me at any moment, you know? Like,
Yeah.
so so I chose a job in performance.
Where you have to search for a job every minute.
Seriously, yeah. Oh my good. Yep.
Yeah.
So, but like I practice because I want to just play the best for them, you know? Like I
Yeah.
want to be able to know what I'm talking about. I think the best teachers are maybe not the best players like in the whole like stratosphere of what the field is,
Yeah.
but the best players know what they're talking about because they do it,
Yeah.
you know, at a high level, whatever it is. So
It's certainly a separate skill set.
it is, yeah. And you're talking about that just reminded me about that. I wanted to mention that. And then you're talking about we are kind of an accumulation of our music that we hear.
Yeah.
It's an echo chamber in our head, that kind of thing, and we extrapolate bits and pieces from it.
Hmm.
Um, and it does just take experience to do that. A lot of my kids, I'll play something, um, and they'll just kind of, this isn't me bragging, but you know, I'll play something and the kids will just be like, well, geez, you know, I can't, you know,
Yeah.
uh, and my go-to phrase, because I'm a teacher now, so of course I have phrases, I have catchphrases, and one of my go-to phrases is like, well, yeah, I've been playing longer than you've been alive, like,
Yeah.
and that usually sets into their head of like, oh, I get, you know, I guess I just have to practice more, you know.
Right. And that kind of comes down to that mastery, where
Mm-hmm.
it's there's things that you play that you don't think about. You can play, probably every scale without really thinking about it.
Yeah.
And there are students that a B flat major scale, one octave is difficult,
Yeah.
and the fact that we have mastery over that, you know, it's worth being proud of those things,
Mm-hmm.
even though, like, this is what I'm struggling with in practice right now, and something that I'm working on is what the heck do you decide to practice when your range is so wide, right? Like, it's like, even if I narrow it down to just jazz, which is usually my focus, right? There's hundreds, thousands of players I could be listening to and emulating, and there's thousands of tunes to learn. I have a spreadsheet I decided to make. I don't know if it was a good idea, because I have a spreadsheet and I have like 200 songs on there that I'm like, I'd love to know these. And it's like, maybe I have 100 in the I know it for sure bucket.
Sure.
And then I talked to Marty, and he's like, yeah, I probably know like 500 songs or something like that. And you're just like, oh my God, like, where do you even start? And then, like, there's like exotic scales to practice and like patterns within all those
I know.
scales.
I bought a scale book. I forget which saxophonist. It's one of the saxophonists' scale books.
Hmm.
And I bought it, and it's, you know, we
It's a
read
tank.
fantasy novels, and that thing is, it's a fantasy novel
Yeah.
brick. Oh my God.
And of course, now there's, we talked about social media briefly. Now there's all those like musicians that are trying to take advantage of like the online presence,
Mm-hmm.
where they're trying to sell. I'll check out my new method book. As here's like one page of my free PDF, and you're like, oh no, here's another thing I'd love to practice.
Yep.
So I'm finding out the balance between, yeah, I'd love to practice all this stuff. In fact, it's led me to like dislike it when I don't have enough time to like get to everything that I
Yeah.
want to get to. Where you're just like, oh my gosh, I hate that I have to uh, do all this like life maintenance stuff, like doing the dishes and running the laundry and stuff like that. Um, where like I'd rather just like go practice this stuff. Unfortunately, that sometimes creates enough stress where you shut down and don't practice at all.
Yep.
And that's the problem. And that's what I'm kind of contending with right now in the practice room. Um,
Is it
but I
what do
do
they
love,
call that? Choice decision paralysis, right? Where they
right,
have yeah. Yeah.
too many things on the plate. And what's funny is there are things that I've decided to put on the plate,
Mhm.
right? Like there's no reason to like, I don't have to learn all those tunes, but I'd love to. There's so many awesome tunes out there,
Yeah.
you know. Um,
I search for
yeah.
so I don't learn jazz standards really. Um
Hmm.
but I do like to learn tunes. That's something I picked up from I don't remember when or I think it was that Maniacal Four, that trombone quartet that I hired, uh,
Mm-hmm.
or that I had the school hire to come play. They also gave master classes and whatever else, and they were all folks from. They went to school at what's the really famous Texas one? The
North Texas?
yeah, they all went there. Yeah, so they were in like the 1 o'clock band and all that kind of stuff, and
Yeah.
that's actually how they kind of formed a trombone quartet. They were the 1 o'clock section, and
Oh, that's
yeah,
cool.
and they're all just like really good friends, and they played all this stuff. And their teachers had them learn standards, yes, but also just tunes. It was like this giant list of like folk songs and just songs, folk songs, like
Yeah,
Christmas songs, hymns, and just random
100%.
melodies. Learn melodies, right?
Yeah.
So that's the thing that I do. I have a giant list. I really want to learn more Scandinavian folk songs because those are really cool.
That's sweet.
Scandinavian folk tunes are they're so interesting and they're very like somber sounding even when they're happy.
Okay. I'll
Yeah,
have to check some out.
they're really sweet. One that I know by heart because so I'll learn the melody. I'll like pick a key that's usually easy to learn it in,
Yeah.
or like the key that I hear it in first. I'll like learn that, and then I'll extrapolate it into all 12. And
Yeah.
so I did that with one. It's called in English it's Astrid My Astrid, and the lyrics are hilarious because it's a folk song. They have lyrics. The lyrics are basically, "I'm sorry I cheated on you. Please take me back." That's kind of the whole like,
Of course.
yeah. But it's this beautiful, pretty song that you can like. Um, so I'll do that, and I like practice ornaments and things on it. Just
Yeah.
little embellishments. Um, but it's so nice to do that because the trombone, especially, I'm more of a classical trombonist, so just being able to put out a good singing melody is
Yeah.
important to what I do.
That
So
was
it's
such a,
yeah.
I think it's kind of lost on modern jazz musicians, but that was certainly a huge part of swing and bebop era soloists was quoting
Mhm.
like folk tunes and stuff like that. I know Dexter Gordon is a huge uh, proponent of that, or
Mhm.
was, I guess. Um, you hear him quote marches and stuff like that. I know, I don't exactly know what solo it's in, but I'm pretty sure you can hear Charlie Parker playing some classical saxophone stuff like a bear or something like that.
Really, I
And
love that.
yeah, of course it's like really swinging and stuff, but like, uh, but it's there. Like they were not only focused on jazz, like they just loved playing all the music that
Hmm.
was out there for their instrument. And I love that you do that because, see here, I'm getting in my head again. Here's another thing I want to add to my practice list, right? But, but it's wonderful to try like and inject that stuff and just absorb everything that's out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And that way, when you want to be cute, it's just available to you because it helps you
Yeah.
learn. I have some students do it. That's a whole nother thing of as a teacher, there's a time and a place for all sorts of things. So,
Oh, yeah.
um, if a student seems acclimated towards learning tunes, the first one I did was Amazing Grace. It's like easy, you know,
Yeah.
it's good to do in all 12 keys. It's a lovely song, so it's enjoyable to learn.
Hmm.
And And secretly, melodies are really good at helping you learn intervals.
Yeah. You
So,
sneaky bastard.
right? Well, and like it helps you learn how to figure out songs that you want to play because like they just don't quite, because all the kids are used to memorizing usually is a scale. Like they know their B flat scale only if you start at the bottom. I sometimes have them start at the top and go
Oh,
down and go back up, and they
yeah.
like, I can't do that because I also call. So kids have to read stuff that is in any key,
Mhm.
but often they'll revert. So I've started to call B flat, the B flat scale, the Pavlovian mode, because they'll just
Oh,
revert to B flat major a lot of the time.
oh, that's funny.
Yep.
Oh my gosh.
So it's a good time. But
Nice.
I digress. Yeah. I suppose, well, yeah, usually these go for about 2 hours. We've gone for our usual time of,
Yeah.
and I didn't roll a single die. Oh, shame.
Uh, Shucks. Roll for initiative.
Right. Did that long ago. I got the bag. We could.
Yeah. I think as soon as I want to schedule some more after Adam's and Chris's babies are out of infant mode.
That's right. Which could be a minute, but yeah,
Yeah,
that'll
but
be all right.
we'll get to that.
Yeah. I mean, it helps that you three are in pretty close proximity
Yeah,
so that the dads can manage that, and then Cody and I
for
can
sure.
just show up whenever, really. So
So how do you end these things?
just like this, it's going to kick you out, but just come right back in. I'll be there.
Okay.